like to call this hearing to order. The committee meets today to receive testimony on the President's defense budget request for fiscal year 2022. Witnesses this morning are Secretary Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, Mr. Michael McCord, Undersecretary of Defense, Comptroller, and General Mark Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I welcome each of you and thank you for your service and willingness to appear before us today. 2 weeks ago, President Biden released his defense budget request for the fiscal year 2022 with a top line of $715 billion. The request focuses on several key areas: defeating COVID-19, prioritizing China as the pacing challenge, addressing advanced and persistent threats, innovating and modernizing DoD, and tackling the climate crisis. The President's defense budget request is a starting point for Congress and must always be viewed in the broader context of the national security and fiscal challenges we face. It is important that we ensure we have the right strategies and resources to keep the American people safe now and in the future, with a keen eye toward evolving threats around the globe. I'm pleased to see that this budget request places a priority on taking care of the men and women who serve in uniform and the civilians who serve alongside them in the department, by including an across-the-board pay raise for military and civilian personnel of 2.7%. While this pay raise is required by law for military personnel, too often DoD civilians have been overlooked. This increase in civilian pay sends an important message to the workforce and begins to reverse years of pay freezes and benefit cuts. Notably, the budget request includes $112 billion in research, development, test, and evaluation funds, the largest ever requested in this area. This includes significant funding for modernization areas such as microelectronics, artificial intelligence, hypersonic missiles, and 5G. Building our strength in these areas will be critical to the modernization of our national security. But as the recent SolarWinds, Microsoft Exchange, and Colonial Pipeline server breaches painfully illustrate, our traditional perimeter-based cyber defenses are simply inadequate to deal with sophisticated adversaries that are clearly advantaged in the cyber domain. I hope our witnesses will expand on what activities DoD is taking to accelerate and expand our cybersecurity and what resources are needed to accomplish them. With regard to the President's transition strategy in Afghanistan, the budget request includes $3.3 billion for the Afghan Security Forces Fund. This will ensure our continued support for the sustainment, infrastructure, equipment, and training requirements for Afghan security personnel. I ask that our witnesses update the committee on this transition. Last year, this committee led the way in establishing the Pacific Defense Initiative, or PDI, to serve as a means for improving the capabilities, design, and posture of our joint forces in the Indo-Pacific region. The PDI was intended to strengthen the presence and resiliency of our armed forces, improve logistics and maintenance capabilities, support exercises, training, experimentation, and innovation for the joint force, and build the defense and security capabilities and cooperation of allies and partners. I am concerned that the Department's budget request takes a heavily platform-centric approach to PDI, and I look forward to working collaboratively with the Department of Defense leadership to more appropriately align resources in the DoD budget with our intent for PDI. Similarly, the budget request proposes an $800 million reduction to the European Deterrence Initiative, the EDI. The initiative, which was also established by this committee, has seen budget decreases for the past 3 years. The Department has suggested that this is a part of transitioning to a steady state in the European Command AOR. I would ask that our witness further explain the reasoning behind the reduced EDI budget, and specifically whether you believe this level of investment in infrastructure, force posture, and capabilities is sufficient to deter Russian aggression. With regard to our nuclear strategy, I understand that the budget request before us supports important steps towards nuclear modernization. Our allies and partners depend on the U.S. nuclear umbrella, and modernization of our strategic forces is needed to reassure them of our dependability. One thing I think everyone would agree on, and often gets lost in discussion, is the fact that arms control and the modernization of our nuclear forces are inherently linked together. Even as we modernize, we should seek ways to promote strategic stability, like the extension of the New START agreement and follow-on talks to cover new strategic weapons and further reduce nuclear stockpiles. Lastly, I would note that fiscal year 2022 is the first year in 10 years that we will not be constrained by the Budget Control Act. Eliminating arbitrary spending caps means that every department's budget can and should be argued on its merits. Taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for programs or systems that are wasteful or ineffective, and Congress must not shrink its responsibilities to get rid of outdated systems in favor of more advanced, effective new technologies and capabilities. Belt tightening in any department, particularly defense, is always a challenge, but it is also an opportunity to evaluate what is necessary and what drives innovation. The department has taken the first difficult steps in proposing $2.8 billion worth of divestments and retirements of platforms, and I will work with my colleagues to evaluate these proposals and make hard but necessary choices. Finally, as we progress through this legislative year, the committee will tackle many important policy issues, none bigger than how we prevent and prosecute sexual assault and harassment in the ranks. Change is coming to the department and the military services. More than anything, cultural change within the force is critical to reducing the number of sexual assaults and related offenses. The President directed a review earlier this year, and I know the department has been hard at work. I look forward to receiving the administration's recommendations to incorporate into the committee's important work on this issue. Again, I thank the witnesses for their participation today, and I look forward to the testimonies. Now let me recognize the ranking member, Senator Inhofe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank all three of our witnesses for their dedicating their lives to securing our nation. Secretary Austin told us, along with nearly every witness who's come before this committee, China is our pacing threat. It's a global, long-term competition, and it's across every arena of the national power, but the military balance of power concerns me most. In 2018, the National Defense Strategy gave us a blueprint for pushing back on China. The bipartisan NDS Commission said that 3 to 5% real growth was needed to implement that strategy. It didn't look like we're going to get that. Since then, the threats have gotten worse. The administration gave us a budget that cuts spending when we need real growth. They want the military to do more on climate change and pandemic response, more mission, but with fewer resources. We've been asking our military to do too much with too little for too long. President Biden's budget cuts would make it even harder. It barely treads water while we face all these threats. This budget cuts ships, aircraft, munitions, and more. We have nearly $25 billion of unfunded priorities. These aren't wish lists. These are risk lists. The budget cuts aircraft procurement by 20%, backslides on Army readiness, and starves Navy shipbuilding. This budget forces our military leaders to choose between being ready for today's fight or the fight of the future. But the Chinese military leaders, they're not making that choice. On Tuesday, I read in the press about the memo by Acting Secretary of the Navy on the next year's budget. He says the Navy must choose between modernizing ships, subs, and aircraft. Does anyone think that the Chinese have to make that decision? The Chinese defense budget has grown by 450% since 2001. They added $200 billion in the last decade, while we cut $400 billion. So we're behind in some of the areas, and we're falling behind in some of the other areas. And as a result, I'm worried deterrence will fail. Maybe today, or in 5 years, or 10 years. And when it does, the cost will be much higher than any investment we could be making today to prevent that. And we're not making hard choices. We're making bad choices and short-sighted choices. The administration tells us that the Pentagon budget is cut because of fiscal realities, but they're spending trillions of taxpayer dollars on everything else under the sun. We all agree that even the administration agrees that a strong military improves all other tools of national power. I just can't understand this short-sighted underfunding of our troops. We make sacred compact with our service members. We tell them we'll take care of them and their families, and we do that very well. We also tell them that we'll give them the tools that are necessary to defend the nation and to come home safely. But we're not holding up our end of the bargain. With this proposed budget, we're failing to give them the resources they need to implement that strategy. And, Mr. Chairman, we need to do better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Inhofe. Secretary Austin, please.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the President's budget request for fiscal year 2022. I'm pleased to appear before you alongside General Milley, whose advice and counsel has been crucial to us as we developed our budget and as we continue to defend this nation, which is our chief responsibility and my top priority. I'm also glad to be joined by our comptroller and our CFO, Mr. Mike McCord. Let me say at the outset that I believe that our budget requests will help us match resources to strategy, strategy to policy, and policy to the will of the American people. Informed by the President's interim national security guidance and my own message to the force, it funds the right mix of capabilities that we need most to defend this nation now and in the future. It invests in hypersonic weapons, artificial intelligence, microelectronics, 5G technology, space-based systems, shipbuilding, and nuclear modernization, to name a few. In fact, this budget asks you to approve nearly $28 billion to modernize our nuclear triad and $112 billion for research, development, test, and evaluation, the largest R&D request ever put forth by this department. Our request also gives us the flexibility to divest ourselves of systems and platforms that no longer adequately meet our needs, including older ships, aircraft, and ISR platforms that demand more maintenance, upkeep, and risk than we can afford. As you know, we've commissioned a global posture review and a new national defense strategy, which will further inform and guide our resource decisions. The department must be ready to meet and keep pace with our competitors, and if necessary, to fight and win the next war, and not the last one. And that's why this budget stays true to our focus on matching the pacing challenge that we clearly see from the People's Republic of China, to include more than $5 billion for the Pacific Defense Initiative. And I would just add that our China Task Force has also completed its work, and yesterday I issued an internal directive kicking off several department-wide efforts that will, among other things, help bolster our deterrence against the PRC and revitalize our network of regional allies and partners and accelerate the development of cutting-edge capabilities and new operational concepts. However, we recognize that China is not our only challenge. Our budget also includes $617 million to counter the damaging effects of climate change and additional funds to prepare for future challenges like another pandemic. It also helps us counter the belligerence that we face from Russia, especially in the cyber realm. And you'll see more than $10 billion here devoted to cybersecurity, cyberspace operations, and cyber research and development. With this emphasis on space, missile defense, and more sophisticated sensors, our budget will also help us counter the increasing ballistic missile capabilities of nations like North Korea and Iran. It funds a troop presence and counterterrorism capabilities in the Middle East and South Asia to meet the threats posed not only by Iran, but also by terrorist networks like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and in Africa like those posed by Al-Shabaab. I'm also confident that this budget will help us maintain the integrated deterrent capability and global posture necessary to back up the hard work of our diplomats and demonstrate our resolve and leadership all over the world, alongside our allies and partners. I know that Afghanistan remains at the top of all of our minds, and today I can report that the retrograde remains on pace. We have accomplished the mission for which our troops were sent to Afghanistan 20 years ago. And I'm very proud of the men and women who made it possible and of those who gave their lives for this mission. I'm also deeply grateful to the families of our service members who have endured as much as they sent their sons and daughters and husbands and wives into battle. And so we will now transition to a new bilateral relationship with our Afghan partners, one that continues to help them meet their responsibilities to their citizens, but one that will not require a U.S. footprint larger than what's necessary to protect our diplomats. And that's one reason why we're asking to move overseas contingency operations funding inside the budget. This will give us and you greater transparency, accountability, and predictability in the budgeting process. This is the right thing to do, and frankly, it's overdue. Now, taking care of our people is also the right thing to do. Our budget request increases funding to support in-home care and support, which has become increasingly important during the pandemic. We'll also be seeking funds to improve military base pay, retention bonuses, and other incentives that will help us attract and retain the best talent. And we'll be working hard to combat challenges that make service in the ranks more difficult for the men and women of the department. From getting a better handle on the extent to which we experience extremist behavior to combating sexual assault and harassment. As you know, my first directive as Secretary of Defense, issued on my first full day in the office, was to service leadership about sexual assault. I made it clear then, and I still believe, that we must not be afraid to try new approaches and to change our minds so that we can truly and fully address the scourge of sexual assault in our force. And clearly what we've been doing hasn't been working, and one assault is too many. The numbers of sexual assaults are still too high, and the confidence in our system is still too low. The Independent Review Commission that we established has provided me with an initial set of recommendations starting around the issue of accountability. And this line of effort is focused on how these crimes are investigated and prosecuted. I've shared these recommendations with General Milley and the civilian military leaders, the civilian and military leaders of the service branches, and I'm carefully reviewing the feedback that they provided me. There will be additional recommendations coming to us from the IRC on prevention, culture, and victim support, and I look forward to receiving them as well and making my full recommendation to the President later this month. As I've said before, what we're doing is not working, and we need to fix it. And I want to be sure that whatever changes we make to the UCMJ, or whatever changes to the UCMJ that I recommend to the President, and ultimately to this committee, that they are scoped to the problem that we are trying to solve and have a clear way forward on implementation and ultimately restore the confidence of the force in the system. You have my commitment to that and my commitment to working expeditiously as you consider legislative proposals. So whatever changes we make, I believe we need to focus on effective implementation and resourcing. And I know I will need your help. Chairman Reed, members of this committee, we feel the greatest military in human history, made up of the finest men and women who have ever donned the cloth of their nation. We also enjoy a civilian workforce deeply committed to every mission that they take on. And for all the things that we know we need to do better, no adversary can match the quality of our people. I'm immensely proud of them and humbled to be of service to them and privileged to be able to serve again with them and their families. I know the values they espouse and the oath that they took. I know what they're capable of, and I believe I have a very good sense of what they need to do their jobs. And I can assure you that the President's budget request for fiscal year 22 fulfills that obligation. And I look forward to answering your questions, and thank you for the steadfast support that you continue to provide to the Department of Defense and for all the efforts that you make every day to ensure that we remain ready to defend this nation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Before I recognize General Milley, since a quorum is present, I would ask the committee to consider 7 nominations. The nominations of the Honorable Frank Kendall III to be Secretary of the Air Force, the Honorable Heidi Shue to be Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Ms. Susanna V. Bloom to be the Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, Department of Defense, Ms. Jill M. Ruby to be the Undersecretary of Energy for Nuclear Security and Administration, National Nuclear Security Administration. Mr. Frank A. Rose to be Principal Deputy Administrator, National Nuclear Security Administration. Ms. Deborah G. Rosenblum to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs. And Mr. Christopher P. Mayer to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict. Is there a motion to favorably report these 7 nominations to the Senate? Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. The motion carries. Thank you very much. General Milley, your comments, please.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and it remains my distinct honor and privilege to represent the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and guardians of the United States Joint Force, the most capable military in the world. Our troops are the best led, best equipped, and best trained force anywhere. And I want to personally thank Secretary Austin for his steady leadership and wise guidance. Your joint force is standing watch, protecting American interests in all domains around the globe. Alongside our allies and partners, American troops are currently training or conducting combat operations or other operations in 165 countries to keep Americans safe. We are conducting major exercises as we speak in Europe. We are monitoring the DMZ in Korea. We are conducting freedom of navigation operations in the strategic waterways of the global commons. We are sustaining operations in space and cyberspace. We are supporting our allies and partners in Africa, Asia, and Europe. And we are patrolling the skies of the Middle East. And as we speak, our joint force is conducting a safe, responsible, and deliberate strategic retrograde from Afghanistan in good order, while ensuring continued support to the Afghan National Security Forces. The purpose of the United States military is simple. It is to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And with that comes 2 key tasks. Task 1 is to fight and win America's wars if necessary. And key task 2 is to prepare to fight and win America's wars. The United States military is a critical component of national power, which in concert with our diplomatic efforts, economic engine, and overriding hope of the American message, that will deter adversaries and preserve the peace. We are prepared to fight, however, and fight and win if those who seek to attack the United States and our allies and partners are undeterred. But force must always be the last resort when other means of achieving our ends have been exhausted. We are in an era of increased strategic competition. The current strategic landscape is witnessing rapid change and the potential for increased threat to the peace and stability of various regions and indeed for the world. States and non-state actors are rapidly transforming technologically, and we are bearing witness to a fundamental change in the character of war. In particular, China is increasing its military capability at a very serious and sustained rate, and we must ensure that we retain our competitive and technological edge against this pacing threat, as Secretary Austin has directed. Readiness, modernization, and combat power are key to deter war and maintain the peace, and equally important are the combat multipliers of teamwork, cohesion, and well-led units. We must resolve the issue of sexual assault and confront the issue of extremism. Both are corrosive to the very essence of what it means to be in the military, and they destroy cohesion, they destroy teamwork, and they reduce combat power. Additionally, we must continue to invest in leader development and talent management required for the future operating environment. And finally, we must continue to nurture and sustain a key strategic source of our strength, which is our network of many close allies and partners around the world. The Joint Force appreciates the work that our elected representatives do to ensure that we have the resources needed to train, equip, and man the force in order to be ready. The days of the Budget Control Act, as noted, are over, and repeated continuing resolutions which eroded readiness are hopefully behind us for good. The joint force will deliver modernization with this budget of our armed forces and security to the people of the United States at the FY22 budget request of $715 billion. While it is a modest increase from the enacted FY21 budget, it is a significant commitment of treasure of the American people and entrusted to us, and we will work diligently to ensure it is spent prudently in the best interest of the nation. The FY22 presidential budget is a result of very hard choices in a year in which the nation has suffered economic hardship due to COVID-19 pandemic. In alignment with the interim national security strategic guidance, this budget delivers a ready, agile, and capable joint force that will compete, deter, and win across all domains, and which is postured for continued dominance in the future. This budget prioritizes nuclear modernization, long-range fires, hypersonic technology, artificial intelligence, shipbuilding, microelectronics, space, cyber, and 5G. These investments, in concert with our recently developed joint warfighting concept, will pave the way for a joint force of the future. The PB22 budget request increases the readiness of the force by developing the joint force of the future, ensuring our people are our number one priority, and positioning us to achieve through teamwork. Many enemies, historically, have grossly underestimated the United States and our people. They've underestimated our national resolve. They've underestimated our capability, our skill, and our combat power. And each, in the past, has made a fatal choice, which ended with their enrollment in the dustbin of history. The same will be true of any enemy that makes that mistake today or tomorrow. We are ready now and will remain so in the future. And we're also facing tough strategic choices, and we're being increasingly challenged with very capable potential adversaries clearly acting in opposition to our interests. Consistent, predictable budgets informed by the will of the people are critical to our nation's defense, and the passage of this budget in a timely way is important. The FY22 presidential budget strikes an appropriate balance between preserving present readiness and future modernization. It's a down payment on investments for the future with a bias toward the future operating environment. It is now that we must set ourselves on a path to modernize the joint force, and this budget contributes to doing that. Our job as your joint force, our contract with the American people, is that we, the United States military, will be able to fight and win when called upon. We will support and defend this Constitution always and forever, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General Milley. I understand Mr. McCord does not have a statement. Is that correct? Thank you, Mr. McCord. Secretary Austin, we are in the process of withdrawing our combat forces, save for embassy protection personnel. It is going rapidly. The projections I think I've read are perhaps July we could have all forces out. I think also, too, the Taliban are aware that if they would encroach upon our forces, that would not only delay our departure, but re-engage us in active operations. So the questions, I think, now are, after the departure of our forces, do you believe you have the appropriate authorities and funding to continue to support the Afghan National Security Forces and to conduct counterterrorism operations after the transition?
Thank you, Chairman. As you know, what we've said is that we intend to maintain a good and productive relationship with the Afghans post our withdrawal or retrograde. And that entails making sure that with your support, we can continue to provide funding for their military and support for their government as well. And I think that support is critical in ensuring that the government retains the ability to function and that the military remains intact. And so, again, we'll need your support to be able to do that. In terms of authorities, I do think that we have the authorities that we need to be able to focus on a discrete set of threats, and that threat is those threats that could conduct operations against the United States of America that would emanate from that space in Afghanistan. So our CT threat is focused on Al Qaeda, and we are confident that we will have the authorities to continue operations.
Are you also confident that, given the significant drawdown of personnel, that you'll be able to effectively distribute the resources to the Afghan National Army and other security institutions?
As you know, Senator, our plan is to keep our embassy there, and hopefully, as we continue to work with the Afghan government, we'll establish those capabilities and procedures necessary to be able to effectively distribute funds and track the movement of those funds and capabilities.
Well, at any point in your review, as the situation develops and you feel you need additional authorities, please do not hesitate to contact the committee. I think both myself and the ranking member would be very eager to provide those authorities. You mentioned in your opening statements the scourge of sexual assault in the military and the ongoing efforts to reform the UCMJ. The last time we did a major military reform in 2017, the defense bill required a 2-year implementation time frame, and every bit of which was used. Critical to this process is that the President must republish the manual for courts-martial and ensure that ongoing investigations and prosecutions are not jeopardized by rushed implementation. And when you forward the administration's recommendations, will you include your assessments of the time, resources, and the qualified personnel necessary to effectively implement those changes?
We will, Chairman, and to your point, any proposed change to the UCMJ is a very serious issue. We'll need the adequate time to implement the change in a very responsible way. And we'll also need resources to make sure that we can effectively implement it. And we'll need flexibility to ensure that if there's something that needs to be adjusted, we can adjust.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, General Milley and Mr. McCord. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because of the interest we have here, I'll just have two brief questions. One, General Milley, in 2018, you testified that it's hard to compare the U.S. and Chinese defense budgets because China's budget is very different. And for a better comparison, we need to make some adjustments, and we have done that. Little things like the cost of labor and all of that. But making those adjustments is not easy, and that's why we required in last year's defense authorization bill that the Pentagon do a study to try to make this comparison. China and Russia combined probably spend more than we do. I made that point in an op-ed piece last May. So I would ask you, General Milley, the Chinese and Russian economies and defense spending are unique, and given this, do you think that their relative combined effort is similar to ours, and do you think that they understate the spending that they're doing?
Senator.
Mike.
Senator, both of our analysis, DOD's analysis and the intelligence community's analysis of budgets for both Russia and China are classified. At an unclassified level, I would tell you that combined, the Russian and Chinese budgets exceed our budgets if all the cards are put on the table. Both governments do not put all their cards on the table when it comes to their budget. It's a very difficult thing to discern that which is being spent on their defense versus other priorities. With respect to China, they have put significant levels of effort of their economy, and of course their economy is second only to ours, significant levels of resources into building the Chinese military. And the Chinese military is, we've noted many times before, is on a significant increasing rise in capability over the last 20 or 30 years. And they continue to invest heavily in that.
That's right. Secretary Austin, during your confirmation hearing in January, you said, and this is a quote, you said, "I see China in particular as a pacing challenge for our department and that you need our help to deter China. Now, I'm worried that if we underfund the military, our military, we will undermine our alliances and weaken deterrence. And in your opinion, well, let me just state this. We've felt for some time and have said that when we have countries that and it happened that Senator Rounds and I went to 6 different countries last week. One of those was Romania, and they reminded us that we talked to them about 2%. They should get to 2% for the defense spending, and they did that, and they told us that they did that, and yet they're looking at us actually reducing our funding, and I'd just like to have you comment on what kind of effect that might have to other countries too.
Well, thank you, Senator. I would say that when you look at our overall contributions to NATO, we contribute a substantial amount to the NATO effort, and will continue to do so going forward. I think the budget gives us the right mix of capabilities and the flexibility to be very effective in our efforts to deter China going forward, and Russia or anyone else who would want to take us on. So I'm confident that this budget will allow us to match our resources to our strategy and our strategy to our policy.
Yeah, my concern has been that our insistence in the previous administration, which I agreed with, that we reach the 2% in these other countries, and they see that it appears that our expectations are much less in this administration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Inhofe. Before I recognize Senator Shaheen, we have a room reserved for a closed session after this open session. So if there are any questions that the panel feels would be best addressed in a closed session, we will retire there. If there are no such questions, then we'll conclude with the open session. Senator Shaheen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all 3 of you for your service to the country and for being here this morning. Secretary Austin, there's an interesting article out in the New York Times today that suggests that our plan in Afghanistan is to not just provide for some sort of over-the-horizon troops to address counterterrorism, but that we might also be looking at ways that we can provide air support to the Afghan forces if they're in danger, or if we're in danger of losing Kabul or another major city in the country. And it also quotes Afghan officials as saying that they've been told by their American counterparts that the U.S. would stop any takeover of a major city. Obviously, who knows what the source of that is, but can you tell me if we are, in fact, first of all, where we are in our plans to develop an over-the-horizon CT force, and if we are, in fact, contemplating any other actions in support of the Afghan troops should the Taliban be in danger of taking over Kabul?
Thank you, Senator. As you know, we continue to provide support to the Afghan security forces as we retrograde. Once we have completed our retrograde, that will be very difficult to do because our capabilities will have diminished in country. I really won't speculate about any potential outcomes or any potential future actions. I will just say that the President has been clear that our mission in Afghanistan has been accomplished, and we are focused on retrograding our people and equipment out. And again, going forward, in terms of our CT efforts, those CT efforts will be focused on those elements that can possibly conduct attacks against our homeland. And in terms of our efforts to establish over-the-horizon capability, I would just point to the fact that, as we have retrograded a lot of our capability out of country. We are doing a lot of things over the horizon now. ISR is being flown from GCC. A lot of our combat aircraft or missions are being conducted from platforms, in the Gulf, and so we have the capability now to do that. What we are looking for is the ability to shorten the legs going forward by stationing some capability in neighboring countries. That is still a work in progress.
So do you have a timetable for when that plan might be completed?
I don't have a timetable. I will tell you that we will move as quickly as we can in conjunction with State Department efforts.
In talking with some of the women leaders of Afghanistan in the last weeks, one of the things that they have asked and said they thought was very important would be for high-level American officials, the President, certainly you as Secretary of Defense, to speak out against the Taliban's attacks against women and girls in the country and to make it clear that that's a violation of international norms of behavior and human rights. I would urge you to do that along with other members of the administration. I think that's the least we can do at this point, is to make a point of the violation of norms and human rights that the Taliban are conducting in Afghanistan, especially when it comes to women and girls. I want to go on to another issue in my time that's left, because one of the things you talked about in your opening statement was the importance of taking care of our people. And as we know, one of the challenges that we're facing, not just among DoD employees, but in intel agencies at state, has been attacks of what has come to be known as the Havana Syndrome. The National Academy of Science report that was released in December calls these directed energy attacks. It's my understanding that DoD is the department that's taking the lead on treating individuals suffering from these attacks. Can you tell us if that's the case and if you have the resources that you need to continue to do that? And then what steps you're taking to protect DoD personnel from future attacks?
Well, the health and welfare of our people is of utmost importance to me, and we are working as one element of a larger whole of government effort to really determine the cause of these, try to determine the cause of these injuries, and also we're working as hard and as fast as we can to expand our medical capabilities, and we've done that and expanded our capabilities to treat TBI and AHI injuries, and so we'll have the ability to treat more people going forward. But again, we'll remain sighted on this, and we're working as a part of a whole of government effort.
And you factored that into your budget request?
We did not ask for additional funds for this specific, but we have sufficient funds to do what's necessary.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Let me recognize Senator Wicker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us today. We had a Sea Power Subcommittee hearing just this week, and the Navy's Vice Admiral witness before that subcommittee said this, and I quote, "We've done many studies over the last 5 years that say we need a larger Navy. The Navy we can afford now is roughly 300 to 305 ships. So if we're going to pace the adversary, we need to have a bigger Navy." Mr. Secretary, did the Vice Admiral misspeak in saying that?
What I would say, Senator, and I think certainly we have the most capable and dominant Navy in the world, and it will continue to be so going forward. And when you talk about naval power, certainly size matters, but what also matters is having the right mix of capabilities in the force. And so Our goal is to make sure that we maintain a ready, capable, and sustainable force in the future.
Okay, did the Navy Vice Admiral misspeak in saying that we need a larger Navy? He said that 2 days ago in testimony before the Sea Power Subcommittee. Can you just answer that?
What I will say, Senator, is that for some time we've had a goal of a 355 ship Navy, and I think that goal is a good goal to shoot at. So I think that's probably what he's referencing.
And this budget doesn't get us anywhere near back on the path to do that. I also have concerns about the Navy's plans for amphibious warships. Last year, Congress authorized in the NDAA multi-ship procurement bundle for 3 LPDs and 1 LHA. This would result in a $700 million cost savings. In that hearing on Tuesday, Acting Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition testified that although the Navy had reached a handshake agreement to execute the block buy, the Department of Defense was unlikely to approve it. Why does it make sense that, knowing that we're going to have to buy these amphibious ships, why does it make sense that the Department of Defense might oppose saving the taxpayers over $700 million by procuring the ships in a block buy?
As we said at the top, Senator, and you well know, we're always faced with making tough choices, and so as we looked at what we could do in this budget and what was best to do in this budget, we're making those choices.
All right. Well, let me just say this. This is an inadequate defense budget. And I sit here and while I very much admire our Constitution and the fact that we have one commander-in-chief, and so the military members, no matter how many stars they have on their shoulders, under our Constitution, they salute that commander-in-chief, and he appoints a Secretary of Defense, and he appoints cabinet officials, and based on the best advice that you and others give him, the commander-in-chief makes the decision. And the OMB that he appoints apparently has decided that we can do just fine in a world where China is expanding in the Pacific, where Hamas is still raining rockets down on Jerusalem, where Russia's not quitting at all, and where we've just heard that their combined budgets are of Russia and China are greater than ours. We've decided, based on what some budget crunchers in OMB and bean counters in OMB have decided that we ought to be able to do, and that we can have massive increases in domestic spending, but a cut in purchasing power for the national defense budget. Let me just say to my colleagues, the Constitution of the United States also gives us the power of the purse. And while we appreciate the suggestion by OMB budget crunchers, it is our obligation to defend this nation, and this proposed budget does not do so in the two respects that I have mentioned, in the respect that the ranking member mentioned earlier on, and it is incumbent on us to reverse this and to get our troops and our nation the national security budget that they need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Let me recognize Senator Gillibrand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for your service, your dedication, and your integrity. As you both know, I've been fighting against sexual assault in the military for the last 8 years. I, along with now 66 co-sponsors on the legislation from the U.S. Senate, are proposing that we draw a bright line at all serious crimes, take them out of this chain of command. And that one change, we believe, will create more transparency, more accountability, a higher professionalization, and will create less bias within the system. General Milley, I'd like to ask you about your thoughts on this proposal. It's my understanding that you are now open to removing sexual assault and related crimes from the chain of command. Can you please confirm that to the committee today?
Thanks, Senator, and thanks for your leadership on this issue. I've said publicly before, and I'll say it here, I think that this issue's been out there for quite a long time, and we in uniform, generals and members of the chain of command, et cetera, we have not successfully moved the needle in resolving sexual assault. And in addition to that, I have some evidence, some studies, some anecdotal evidence that junior members of the chain of command or junior members in the military have, primarily women, have lost faith and confidence in our chain of command to resolve sexual assault through the chain of command. So I am very open-minded to some significant and fundamental change in the area of sexual assault and sexual harassment. What you mentioned was the bright line of all the other, all felonies, for example. I think that requires some detailed study before we completely overhaul the entire UCMJ. But the focused area of sexual assault and sexual harassment, completely open-minded to some very significant change. And I think that's also true of most of the senior leaders in uniform.
Thank you very much, General. As you and I have discussed, in recent years, we've seen some very chilling statistics about bias in the military justice system against people of color. Black service members were at least 1.29 times and as much as 2.16 times more likely to have disciplinary action taken against them in the average year across all branches from 2006 to 2015. These disparities largely did not improve and in some cases got worse in the most recent years. As an example, the December 2020 Air Force Inspector General's review found that black service members, quote, voiced a consistent lack of confidence, end of quote, in Air Force discipline processes. 3 in 5 black service members said they would not receive the same benefit of the doubt as their white peers if they got into trouble, and 1 in 3 said they believe the military justice system is biased against them. Problem, however, is even more chilling when you look at military capital cases. One 2012 death penalty study found that 41% of defendants were people of color, but 67% of those that actually received the death penalty were people of color. So the reason why we wrote our bill 8 years ago to draw bright lines against all serious felonies, all serious crimes, anything that carried more than a year of penalty, was not just to professionalize the system and remove bias against survivors of sexual assault, but also to remove biases across the board and to professionalize the entire military justice system. That is what all military experts in criminal justice recommended, and it's what our allies actually did over the last 40 years. UK, Germany, Israel, Canada, Netherlands, Australia. And so as a result, we mirrored that in our legislation, and we carve out all uniquely military crimes. So I'd like to know, General Milley, will you remain to have an open mind as you review these statistics and this additional data before you make your recommendation to the committee?
Totally. And I'm very sincere. I have a complete open mind on this. As I said up front in my opening statement, the United States military has a singular purpose to support and defend the Constitution. And we have 2 tasks, to fight and win our nation's wars and to prepare to fight and win our nation's wars. And unit cohesion is a significant contributor. In fact, it's probably the most important contributor to combat power. And sexual assault, sexual harassment, any kind of deviance from any sort of good order and discipline rips apart at that. Central to the concept is also the commander's personal responsibility and accountability for the good order and discipline of the unit. And they are personally responsible for the cohesion. So I am absolutely open-minded to suggestions to improve the system because what we want to do is fix the problem and improve the combat power of the U.S. military.
Secretary Austin, we've also had the benefit of having a conversation about these details, and I'd like to ask you the same question. Will you remain an open mind as you look at new data about racial disparities, as well as the data you will receive from the panel that you requested advice on, specifically sexual assault-related crimes? And I ask that you remain an open mind as you look at the full version of the details and facts that the DoD has compiled over many years and the work of this committee over the last 8 years.
Well, before I answer that, Senator Gillibrand, just let me thank you for your incredible work that you have done over the years on this issue, on the issue of sexual assault and sexual harassment. Whatever changes occur going forward will be largely due to your incredible dedication to this issue. So on behalf of the Department of Defense, thank you for what you've done. As you know, Senator, first of all, yes, I always have an open mind to solving any tough problem. But as you know, the commission that the President tasked me to stand up and that has stood up and provided me some initial recommendations and still owes me more recommendations, has been focused on the issue of sexual assault and sexual harassment. And so those are the problems that we are trying to resolve and improve. And so, but yes, I always maintain an open mind with any tough problem, but we're focused on the issue of sexual assault and sexual harassment. And again, thank you for all the work that you've done on this issue.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Now let me recognize Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, gentlemen. I, too, want to thank you for your patriotism, your years of service, and your years and years of caring for those who serve with you in protecting this nation. Secretary Austin, I appreciate the way the budget has prioritized nuclear modernization and kept important programs like GBSD, LRSO, and the Columbia-class submarine on track. I'm also happy to see it invests in NC3 and finally begin moving forward on replacing the E-4B with Survivable Airborne Operations Center. During your confirmation, you talked about the need for a review of our nuclear posture and modernization programs. Has the department begun a formal nuclear posture review, and when do you expect it to be complete?
We have not begun that review yet, Senator, but it will begin very shortly, and it will take us several months to conduct the review.
Well, I think that review process is so very important. These systems are the most important military capabilities that we possess, and decisions about our nuclear policies and programs must be considered in a thorough, deliberative process that allows stakeholders from across the Department of Defense as well as other federal agencies like the Department of Energy and our allies to provide their input so that decisions can be made with a full understanding of the consequences. We can't be careless about this, which is why I was very concerned to see a news story that put forth a copy of a memo from the acting Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Harker, in which he directed the Navy to defund the Sea-Launched Cruise Missile Program. This memo was signed June 4th. That's just 1 week after the Department of Defense submitted a budget request that asked for $5 million to continue to study that concept, and NNSA requested $10 million to conduct its own assessment. Based on what you've just said, it seems like this decision was made outside of any kind of posture review process. Is that correct?
Senator, I've not seen the memo, but I would say that, all of us, all the services and the department are again, making tough choices in terms of what to prioritize and where to accept risk. That memo has to be pre-decisional because of where we are in the process. And so I don't feel comfortable in commenting on his memo. I would just say that again, I am committed to our posture review to make sure that we adequately analyze what our capabilities are, what's needed in the future, and that we maintain the right balance in our nuclear forces going forward.
So you were not consulted on that at all?
It's an internal department memo, I believe, based upon what's been said.
General Milley, were the Joint Chiefs consulted at all, to your knowledge?
I'm not familiar with the memo, and nor was I consulted. But as soon as we're done here, I'll go find that memo and get consulted.
Thank you, sir. I find it very concerning that an acting service secretary who hasn't been confirmed by the Senate, is making a decision like this outside of any review process, without analysis or input from OSD policy, from Nuclear Matters, the Joint Chiefs, or STRATCOM, and without talking to other agencies or having, it seems, any discussions with our allies. I would also point out that the analysis of alternatives for the missile is still ongoing, and so it would seem very, very premature to reach any conclusions about it being feasible or infeasible. I don't think this is the right way to make decisions about nuclear policy. Do you agree with that, Secretary Austin?
I do, Senator.
Should a decision like this be made through that review process?
I have every confidence that it will be, Senator.
Thank you. I hope you will follow up with the acting secretary to make sure that it's a posture review that makes a decision on this. Does the department still support the president's FY22 budget request for this program?
It does.
Thank you. Happy to hear that. Thank you again.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Now let me recognize Senator Kelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to Secretary McCord and Secretary Austin and General Milley for being here today. General Milley, this question is for you, it's specific to the A-10. I think you would agree that properly balancing the need to sustain America's military with the need to modernize is paramount to ensuring our adversaries are unable to outpace the United States. Having the right equipment available to our troops on the battlefield is critical, which is why I am very concerned by the proposed divestment of 42 A-10 aircraft in the fiscal year 2022 budget. As you know, the A-10 is a combat-proven asset that is unmatched in its ability to provide close air support to troops on the ground. The Air Force has not been able to establish a convincing replacement to carry out this mission, and it certainly has not demonstrated a replacement that can match the A-10's cost effectiveness. Budget analysts have estimated a modest cost savings if the A-10s are divested, but those savings are quite small when you consider the scope of the department's $715 billion budget. And it's critical that we consider the real costs of what we would be trading away if we were to take this action before an effective close air support replacement is in place. American troops rely on close air support in the most dire of circumstances. The A-10 has saved the lives of many men and women because of its unique capabilities. Everyone I speak to, everyone who has had experience with the A-10 in combat wants that to be the plane that shows up when they're in trouble. So when I think about the trade-offs we'd be making by divesting, I just don't see that the risk has been properly accounted for. And I expect that you've had some of these same conversations and experiences as you talk to our troops. So, General, do you feel that we have adequately assessed the risk that these retirements could pose for our troops on the ground?
Thanks, Senator. And as a ground soldier who's been in a lot of firefights and know exactly what you're talking about with the A-10 or attack helicopters or any other munition delivered by air, it's a very, very important capability, and personally I'm a big fan of the A-10. However, we're talking about 42 aircraft. We're still going to have 239. We've got enough for 5 squadrons. What we have to do, we collectively, Congress, Department of Defense, we in uniform, we've got to recognize and begin to shift toward a future operating environment and a changing character of war. And we must shift to the capabilities that are going to be relevant, survivable, and effective against a Tier 1 adversary sometime in the future. This is a modest decrease in the number of A-10s. I think it is acceptable risk, and I support the Air Force's recommendation.
So, General, we often think about these things as, what does day one of the war look like?
Yep.
I'm also concerned about future conflict on day 30, 60, day 180. And in a former life, I used to be a test pilot. I've flown close air support missions myself on an airplane that does not do the job well. And I don't see another airframe in our inventory, not the F-16, not the F-35, that can do the mission like the A-10 can. And when you combine the fact that it is far superior in that role and protects troops on the ground when they need it the most, and at the same time is cheap compared to the flight hour cost of an F-35 or even an F-16. And we don't have an airplane that can do this mission like the A-10 can. And I am seriously concerned that if we go down this road and we remove 42 airplanes from the inventory, that if we wind up in a conflict and we wind up day 30, 60, 90, we're going to be regretful that we don't have that platform. So thank you, General, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Now let me recognize Senator Cotton, please.
Mr. Secretary, I have received, along with Congressman Crenshaw, several hundred whistleblower complaints about Pentagon extremist and diversity training. I want to share just a small selection of what your own troops are saying. And Mr. Chairman, I have a longer list that I'd like to submit for the record.
Without objection.
Again, this is just a few examples. One Marine told us that a military history training session was replaced with mandatory training on police brutality, white privilege, and systemic racism. He reported that several officers are now leaving his unit, citing that training. Another service member told us that their unit was required to read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, which claims, and this is a quote, "White people raised in Western society are conditioned into a white supremacist worldview." A member of the Special Operations community has told us that they are being instructed that, quote, "The U.S. Special Operations community is racist." One Army officer relayed to us the words of his general officer who told him that the entire U.S. Army is racist. A midshipman at the Naval Academy said classmates are calling America a fundamentally racist place and that this sentiment is not contested by school administrators. An airman told us their unit was forced into a racist exercise called a privilege walk, where members of the wing were ordered to separate themselves by race and gender in order to stratify people based on their perceived privilege. One African-American officer disparagingly said, and I quote, "The Navy thinks my only value is as a black woman and not the fact that she is a highly trained military specialist." Soldiers have come forward to tell us they are being forced to watch videos about systemic racism and documentaries that rewrite America's history as a fundamentally racist and evil nation. One Space Force officer told me that 2 Guardians left his ranks in a short period of time. One was a young African American who said that after the training, she would never have joined the military had she known that it was such a hotbed of racism. The other was a white airman who said he didn't sign up to be indoctrinated and filed separation paperwork. Mr. Secretary, we're hearing reports of plummeting morale, growing mistrust between the races and sexes where none existed just 6 months ago, and unexpected retirements and separations based on these trainings alone. And again, these are not my words, these are the words of your own troops. So I want to ask a few simple but vital questions. Mr. Secretary, do you believe that our military is a fundamentally racist organization? Yes or no, please.
Well, I won't give you a yes or no answer on that, Senator, because it deserves more than a yes or no. The military, like any organization, will have its challenges, but I do not believe it is a fundamentally racist organization.
Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off, but our time is limited. I think it is a pretty simple question. I'm glad that you agree it is not fundamentally racist. Do you believe that any member of the military should be treated differently based on their skin color and sex? Again, yes or no will do.
Again, this question deserves more than a yes or no answer.
Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry to cut you off. Our time is limited. It is a very simple question. Should a member of the organization you lead be treated differently, in violation of the Constitution, I would add, based on their sex or the color of their skin?
No, I do not believe that, and that is
okay.
why we have diversity, equity, and inclusion focus in the military.
And the military, for decades, has been one of the institutions in the society where you are most likely to get ahead based on your own performance, on your own merit, irrespective of the color of your skin or where you came from or who your parents were.
Senator, I absolutely agree with that, and I am an example of that.
Your distinguished career is an
I would also say that
Mr. Secretary, your career is an excellent example of that. But I have more questions based on the reports we've seen. The military has included the works of critical race theories on its reading list by authors like Abraham Henry Rogers, who now calls himself Abraham Kendi, and Robin DiAngelo. Mr. Kendi has written, quote, "The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination," end quote. Do you agree with that proposition?
I've not read that, and I don't, I certainly don't agree with what you just said. But
Mr. Secretary,
it's always important to have the full context of anything that you're being asked to evaluate.
Mr. Secretary, do you believe that race and sex should be the key factor when selecting combat leaders, rather than, say, operational excellence, technical proficiency, leadership, agility, and integrity?
I do not, Senator. I think what you just said should be key components in making any selection.
Thank you. I'm glad we agree on all this. So let me just wrap up by saying this. If troops are subjected to the kinds of trainings drawing on critical race concepts like America and our military is inherently racist, or certain races are inherently privileged, other races are inherently victimized, given what you've said, should they report it up their chain of command or to the Inspector General or to other appropriate channels?
They've always had, yes, they should. They've always had that ability to do that, and I would recommend that in the future. I would also say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to this military now, and it will be important in the future. And so we're going to make sure that our military looks like America, and that our leadership looks like what's in the ranks of the military. And I appreciate your support on that.
And I agree with that. And like I said, the military has always been one of the most diverse institutions in our society where you can get ahead irrespective of the color of your skin or who your parents are or where you came from. And I'm glad that we agree on that. This is not about diversity in general, though. This is about a very specific kind of anti-American indoctrination that is seeping into some parts of our military based on the whistleblower complaints we have received. Thank you. My time's expired.
Thank you. Let me recognize Senator Kane, please.
Mr. Secretary, I want to give you a chance to explain the context. Senator Cotton asked you a question about your own career, and you indicated that your career is an indication that the military can be welcoming to all kinds of people, but you were then going to explain the context of what your own personal experience has shown you during your time in the military about why we need to take seriously these issues of diversity and inclusion. The senator had other questions, but I'd like to hear how you were going to answer that question, giving the full context.
I think the leadership has a responsibility to create a climate where everyone, first of all, we should be welcoming to everyone who can qualify and who is fit to serve and who can maintain the standards. And secondly, we ought to look like the America that we support and defend, and our senior leadership should look like what's in the ranks. And where we've done a great job in recruiting very highly qualified and capable people, I think we need to do a bit better in terms of making sure that we're absolutely inclusive and making sure that we create pathways are available for everybody that's in the ranks to achieve, to realize their full potential. And so that's what that diversity, equity, inclusion is all about. It's about cohesion. It's about making sure that we remain the most effective and lethal fighting force in the world. And we have been in the past, and we will be in the future.
And when we've moved toward diversity, the military, it's always made us stronger. When President Truman integrated the military, it was not uniformly popular. In fact, I believe as Secretary of the Army ended up resigning after refusing to desegregate units about a year after the order. But moves like that, where the military has often led society in building cohesion, the military does it well. They're not always immediately popular, but they end up paying dividends not just for the military, but for American society. It has to be done sensitively, carefully, by people who understand it, but But I applaud you and other leaders who are trying to do that. Let me now move to questions that have been asked about the top line of the budget. And I've gotten some handouts from folks who haven't yet asked questions, and so I can see some more questions on this are coming. So, General Milley, if I recall, you became head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in late 2018, is that correct?
2019.
2019?
Senator, 1 October.
And so were you involved in the discussions around the submission of President Trump's FY21 budget, which came to this committee in February of 2020?
Sure, absolutely.
So I guess I want to just compare the Biden proposal, President Biden's proposal for defense, to President Trump's proposal. And my argument is, to some of my colleagues who are trying to attack the Biden budget, it's exactly what President Trump proposed. President Trump gave us a future year defense plan in February of 2020, and it called for a top line of $721 billion for this year. Now, President Biden has submitted a top line of $715 billion, so it would suggest that maybe the Trump budget projection for this year was $6 billion higher than the Biden budget, but that's actually not the case, because under the Trump administration, there was a practice of taking money out of the Pentagon budget for non-military emergencies. Over a 13-month period an 11-month period between March of 2019 and February of 2020, the Trump administration took $10 billion out of the top line. So that straddled 2 fiscal years. So divide that in half. About $5 to $6 billion a year was taken out of the Pentagon's budget by President Trump. So the difference between 715 and 721 is essentially erased, so long as President Biden doesn't take money for non-military purposes. I have asked the OMB director, I have asked everybody that I know in the Biden White House, is it the intention of this White House to take Pentagon dollars for non-military purposes? And the answer to that is no. President Biden says, if Congress appropriates, I'm going to respect the appropriation, and I'm not going to spirit monies out of the Pentagon and use them for non-military emergencies. So my belief is this is a budget that was essentially identical to the budget that we would have seen under a President Trump, based upon the Trump numbers that were submitted to us over a year ago. And when those numbers were submitted to us, I didn't hear anyone on this committee complain about President Trump didn't have a high enough top line. We ultimately control what the number will be. But in terms of the difference between the two administrations and their budget submissions to this body, I would argue that they're identical. President Biden has submitted a top line that is essentially identical to what President Trump would have submitted based upon the documents they gave us a year ago. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator Kane. And now let me recognize Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your service to our country. I'd like to follow up a little bit and continue the discussion that Senator Kane has begun, and that is with regard to the top line on the budget. I do believe that this defense budget request on the whole is moving in a very similar direction that we had before with regard to trying to follow through with the National Defense Strategy, the NDS. I think, and I would like confirmation, I'll begin with General Milley, that this particular budget is focused on achieving the major goals that are found in the the NDS from 2017. General Milley, could you share a little bit about, in terms of what those major goals are and the priorities are in the NDS that this particular budget is trying to achieve?
Sure, Senator. The NDS, as it was written, and that was under Secretary Mattis, and I was at that point Chief Staff of the Army, and all the Joint Chiefs participated in that. That's a rigorous document, it's well thought out, and it stood the test of time, and we all still use it as a guiding light. And we're under a review with Secretary Austin, and we'll see how that comes out, but there'll be modifications. The document's 4 or 5 years old now, so there'll be some modifications to that, but it's still good, and the fundamentals of it emphasize readiness, modernization, lethality, allies, partners, irregular warfare. It calls out China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, counterterrorism. So the main structures of it are more or less still valid. And perhaps China is a little bit more advanced now than they were, say, 5 years ago. So it's still a fundamentally solid document. But I would tell you, as I said in my opening statement, the $715 billion budget requires hard choices in terms of prioritization, but I think it adequately meets the needs in terms of the priorities of the current existing NDS and the one that we're working on to modify under Secretary Austin's signature. So I'm very comfortable that we can provide an adequate defense of the United States of America with a $715 billion budget.
I understand the direction and the fact that you've been involved in establishing and that your input has been involved in the development of this budget. But I also note that I think nuclear command and control upgrades are critical and would be recognized under this as well, would it not?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And the continued development and modernization of the nuclear triad would also be involved, would it not?
Absolutely. In fact, we've said that the recapitalization nuclear triad is one of the number one it's the number one priority in terms of the actual programs, programmatic spending. It's critical that we have the air, sea, and land components of that triad in order to maintain the security of the United States going forward.
See, General, I think that the basic goals of the NDS are represented within this. I think that's, yes. I do not disagree with that. My concern, and that I will express, is that it's based on being able to handle those goals, but also being able to maintain and not expect the members of the armed services to continue to do the day-to-day operations if we have increases in inflation, whether it be for fuel or for other supplies, for health care and so forth. General, I think there were some very hard choices made. And I guess my question to you, sir, and I don't intend this to be a gotcha question, but the hard choices that had to be made in order to achieve the top-line goals of the NDS, where are the reductions or the limitations that have to be recognized when we do have a very similar, in terms of the total number of dollars, when we do expect that inflation will run perhaps between 3% and 5%, and at the same time, the NDS expected to have, and in order to meet its goals, an ongoing increase of between 3% and 5% over inflation, which clearly is not reflected in the budget, and I know is not news to you, sir.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can do the numbers a lot of different ways, and we have Mike McCord here, and he knows it better than anyone else. But this budget is about $11 billion more than the FY21 enacted budget. If you factor in inflation, you normalize the dollars, it's more or less flat, or even, I think it's 0.5 less or something like that. So it depends on which way you look at the numbers. But in terms of the key capabilities, Senator Kelly mentioned 42 A-10s getting divested. We had to make a choice between buying 2 subs and buying 1 destroyer and a frigate, and 2 subs, 1 destroyer and a frigate versus 2 destroyers, and things like that. So there's hard choices in all of the domains, and this is my 6th budget. In every single budget I've seen, we're always making hard choices. We always have you for lists. We always have ways to spend more money effectively for the defense of the country. But in my professional opinion, a $715 billion budget, as long as we are disciplined in its application and we adhere to the priorities that we've established, will provide for the defense of the United States.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service to our country.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Now let me recognize Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I want to discuss just for a moment one of those hard choices. The top Navy unfunded priority is a destroyer that was eliminated from the budget that was already committed to under the multi-year procurement. That has several problems. One, national security. These Flight 3 DDG destroyers are the workhorse of the Navy. Eyes and ears around the world, very important part of our assets. But it also sent a shudder through the industrial base. It's unprecedented in my experience that a multi-year has been breached, which would actually cost the government money in penalties. I hope, Mr. Secretary, that you and Admiral Gilday can work with us to restore that ship, because I think it has importance beyond just the one ship, but the symbolism of breaking a multi-year and also pulling back on our commitment to increasing the capacity of the Navy is, I think, a very important priority. So that's not really a question. It's an entreaty to you to work with us to try to find the funds to restore that ship and restore the Navy's number one unfunded priority. Will you commit to working with us on that?
Absolutely, Senator. We will do everything we can to make sure that we maintain a good working relationship with Congress, and I appreciate your tremendous support throughout, and especially now. We want to make sure that we maintain a ready, capable, and sustainable force. We also want to make sure that the industrial base has the ability to produce what we've asked them to produce. And current plans are to buy that DDG in 23.
Thank you. The importance of the industrial base is, I live within 8 miles of the industrial base in Maine, and the industrial base is not something you can just turn off and on. It's got to be something that's sustained and maintained over time. Let me turn to a different topic. I believe one of the most serious risks this country faces today is accidental conflict with China. Some kind of conflict in the South China Sea, the Strait of Taiwan, and the danger of escalation from that accidental conflict of some kind. It's concerning to me that we don't seem to have an effective hotline, direct line, whatever you want to call it, with China officials at your level and also at the presidential level. I understand the Chinese are reluctant about this, but I believe this should be a national security priority. And I looked up yesterday, and I find that Amazon has 11 copies of The Guns of August in Chinese, and I think what I might do is buy those and send them to the Politburo in Beijing, because of this is a very clear and distinct danger. Do you agree with me that a better deconfliction link between mill to mill and also government to government with China would be an important mitigation of this risk?
I absolutely agree with you. As we look at some of the aggressive behavior that we've witnessed from China in the Indo-Pacific, I'm concerned about something that could happen that could spark a crisis, and I think we need the ability to be able to talk with both our allies and partners, but also our adversaries or potential adversaries. And so I think there needs to be a direct line of communication between the military and also between government officials as well. So I share your concern, and I absolutely agree with you that this is critical.
Thank you. One other area that's come to my attention, in fact, we had a hearing yesterday on missile defense, and General Van Herk said he had to pry the data out of another agency. We have Goldwater-Nichols, which has enabled joint operations. We don't necessarily have a joint capability acquisition, particularly in the area of software. And I hope that we might work with you and General Milley and others on how to rationalize, if you will, the joint acquisition of things like software so that we don't have silos within the military that are analogous to the silos that we had pre-Goldwater-Nichols. Is that something that you will be willing to work with us on?
Absolutely. I think it's critical, and you have my commitment to do so.
General Milley, I'm sorry I didn't get my questions to you, but perhaps we'll have a second round. Thank you very much,
I'm okay
Mr.
with
Chairman.
that, Senator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today and for your continuing service to our great United States of America. Superior weapons personnel and technology ensured that we won the 20th century. But of course, now our adversaries have adapted their technologies, they've improved their operating concepts, and they've expanded their challenges into the new domains of cyber and space. And in fact, President Biden has stated the world is at an inflection point with shifting global dynamics and emerging crises that demand attention. We, of course, know that we face emboldened adversaries such as Vladimir Putin in Russia and President Xi Jinping in China. Both are actively seeking to disrupt a stable and prosperous global order. And then, of course, we have other actors like Iran and North Korea presenting their own significant threats. And as we are withdrawing from Afghanistan, we don't see the removal of a terrorist threat. Instead, we see, as the president has stated, the threat has become more dispersed, metastasizing around the globe. So, of course, we want to make sure that we are funding and resourcing our troops appropriately. But going along with taking care of our own troops is working with others, allied nations. And Secretary Austin, in a March editorial in the Washington Post, you wrote about the importance of joint partnerships with other nations and called them force multipliers. I do agree with you, Secretary. You wrote, "It would be a huge strategic error to neglect these relationships, and it's a wise use of our time and resources to adapt and renew them to ensure they're as strong and effective as they can be." Yet the president's defense budget guts our partner nation joint exercise budget compared to the pre-COVID levels by over 50%. So how do you square your advocacy for improving our interoperability with our NATO allies and theater partners around the world with those proposed cuts?
Well, certainly with respect to NATO, we're encouraging the members of NATO to do more, to invest in their defense, and also to do more to contribute to NATO overall. What we've been focused on is making sure that, you've heard me say that China is our pacing challenge. And so we really weighted our main effort there to the Indo-Pacific region. And you'll note that my first trip overseas was out to the region along with Secretary Blinken, and we visited South Korea, we visited Japan, and also made a visit to India as well. Again, we truly value the importance of strong relationships with our allies and partners. I think there's great capacity that can be leveraged there, and so in some areas, those partnerships, while still strong, are not as strong as they could possibly be. So we'll remain focused on that. But go ahead.
I do hope so, Secretary. I think this is a really important area to focus on, making sure that we are able to leverage them and continue to use our allies as those force multipliers. And Mr. Secretary, I also wanted just to make a brief statement too. I do appreciate that you've stated your commitment to making changes to how the military handles and prevents sexual assault. And I'm concerned about the continued delay that we continue to face, though. Certainly, if any of our adversaries were attacking members of our military, as we have seen within our own ranks, members attacking other members within our own ranks, if it had been an adversary, we would have responded immediately. We must respond immediately as well. So I'm encouraging both you and the chairman to continue to push on this issue to make sure we bring resolution and justice for our members of the military, those very important survivors. Just a brief statement, and I'm sorry, General Milley, I didn't get to my questions for you either, and Secretary McCord, I'll follow up with you later on the audit. But I do want to echo concerns that were raised by Senator Fisher about the Navy's intent, whether it was an inter-office memo, whatever it was. I do also want to stress my concern that the Navy intends to cancel development of the Sea-Launched Nuclear Cruise Missile. I think this is very, very concerning, especially coming from an acting secretary that has yet to be confirmed, and I hope that that is truly not reflective of the overall attitude of the Department of Defense. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It is not, Senator, and we will, as we said, we will be true to our posture review and make sure that that drives the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Now let me recognize via WebEx Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Secretary Austin, during your confirmation process, you disclosed that you were on the board of Raytheon Technologies, one of the nation's largest defense contractors. And that caused me to ask you for some commitments about ethics issues that you would face. Existing ethics laws already require some commitments, but they don't go nearly far enough. And this matters a lot because the Pentagon spends $360 billion every year on goods and services provided by contractors, and those contractors have a revolving door with the DoD. So that's why I've introduced legislation to strengthen ethics rules for all public officials. But it's also why I asked you during your hearing to extend your recusal from matters involving Raytheon for the duration of your government service. I asked you to pledge not to receive or not to seek a waiver of that recusal and to refrain from seeking compensation from a giant defense contractor within 4 years of leaving government service. And you agreed to make those commitments, and I want you to know, I appreciate that. I think the American people appreciate that too. Secretary Austin, as I recall, you explained that you voluntarily made these commitments because you think it's important that the American people have concrete assurances so that they never doubt that you are working for them and not for giant defense contractors, right?
Yes, that's true.
Good. And I just want to say, I also asked several Trump nominees to make the same commitments, and they refused. You, by contrast, demonstrated considerable leadership in making those commitments. Now, since your confirmation, the Senate has confirmed 5 additional nominees to go to work at the Pentagon. Not a single one of them was on the board of a major defense contractor. None of them reported that the bulk of their income came from our most powerful contractors. And I appreciated that, and I supported all of their nominations. But this committee is now being asked to consider nominees who don't meet that test. And in these cases, when nominees report the vast majority of their income from major defense contractors, either through direct employment or consulting, or when they're on those companies' boards, I plan to ask nominees to make the same voluntary ethics commitments that you did during your confirmation. So let me ask you, Secretary Austin, do you agree that the people working for you who have similar or even more extensive ties to industry should be living up to the same ethics commitments that you made? Do you think it's important that the American people have confidence, as you put it, that these Pentagon officials are working for the American people and not for their former employers in the defense industry?
Well, Senator, you've heard me say on a number of occasions that sound ethical behavior is important to us, important to me, and important to the department. I have every reason to believe that those who have been nominated to serve will conduct themselves properly and exercise sound ethical behavior. And I truly support I'm truly appreciative of your support in getting our nominees confirmed as quickly as possible. We absolutely need them on the team.
Well, let me say, though, I recognize the importance of filling these important Defense Department positions, but I'm asking for commitments that they are going to avoid conflicts of interest, and I've laid out what they are, and you've agreed to them. So the question I'm asking is whether you think that the people who are going to be working for you who have these ties should make the same kind of commitments that you made?
Senator, I believe that they will conduct themselves appropriately. I have no concerns about their ethical behavior. I think that they are committed to doing the right things.
Well, look, I appreciate that you don't want to step into this, but this is what leadership is about. I'm still in conversation with the current nominees where I think these commitments are warranted, and I hope that we can come to an understanding as their nominations progress. And if we can, I will support their nominations. But in these cases and going forward, if nominees with significant ties to the defense industry refuse to make the commitments you made, then I will vote no in this committee on their nominations, and I will ask for a roll call vote on the floor where I will vote no again. So let me be clear. I'm asking for these commitments, not because I'm challenging anyone's integrity, but because I think it is critical that the American people have total confidence that our public officials are truly working for them and not for the defense industry that has paid them so well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Let me recognize Senator Tillis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I want to go back to the discussion of the UCMJ and what's described as the military sexual assault. It's an area I'm frustrated with. I've spent a lot of time with Senator Gillibrand, but I am, Secretary Austin, I am concerned that even when we have the discussion here, people think we're just talking about military sexual assault, but we're talking about any alleged crime that would have a sentence of over 1 year. So that's a sweeping change to the UCMJ. I'm also concerned with some of the technical aspects that haven't been spelled out in the bill. It's more of a framework. We haven't seen the details, but one of the things that I'm most troubled by is the 6-month implementation time frame. In your judgment, to the extent that you know the details of Senator Gillibrand's proposal, is that even possible to be implemented?
I don't know all of the specific details of her proposed timeline. What I would tell you is, and I would echo what I said to the chairman a couple of minutes ago, is that I would, any change that we make, Senator, I would hope that we would be provided the ample time to make sure that we properly and appropriately implement these changes, because a change to the UCMJ is a very significant issue in the military. And we want to make sure we get this right, and we will get it right if a change is required.
General Milley, do you think maybe taking crimes that could be barracks larceny out of the chain of command is a good idea and would put us in a position where good order and discipline on the part of the command would be undermined?
As I mentioned to Senator Gillibrand before and some others earlier, I think the commander is essential to maintaining good order and discipline in the military. We're a military that's built to fight. The UCMJ is there to support combat power. At the same time, cohesion is critical, and I am very, very open to significant change in the area of sexual assault, sexual harassment. When we get beyond that, at this point, my position is I need to study it more. I'm open-minded, but I think we would be it needs a lot of due diligence before we bundle all the 1-year felonies and take them away from the commander. So I think I'd ask the right to study it further.
General Austin, I think you've heard from some of us about the need for a timely report back on the commission findings and the DOD recommendations. With the markup coming up next month, I think it's very important that we get that feedback if it's to have any impact on what may likely be in the NDA mark.
You're right, Senator. And I understand your sense of urgency. I share that sense of urgency. As you know, the Independent Review Commission is still evaluating the other 3 lines of effort that include prevention, victim care, and also climate. I'll get those back shortly. And when I do, I'll make my recommendations to the President, and those recommendations will be based upon what I get from the IRC, plus my consultations with the leadership of the services.
Thank you. Jumping to budget matters, the immediate response force, I know you've spent some quality time, you and General Milley, down at Fort Bragg. It was deployed back in 2019 after the Iranian-backed Hezbollah attacked our embassy in Iraq. The reports that I've got on the ground there is the folks from the 82nd Airborne that would be a part of the response spent pretty much the day going over what you all know is a big complex, getting ready to do it at the expense of briefings and preparation. I want to make the strategic deployment complex is not yet even on the unfunded priorities list. Why is that?
I'll look into that, Senator. I don't know why the Army hasn't put that on their unfunded requirements list, but I'm sure that the Army's choice is based upon the input they've gotten from the 18th Airborne Corps Commander and others. But I'll engage the Army on it.
We'll submit a question for the record because I'm concerned that in an instance where we may have to once again send out an immediate response deployment request that they're not the best prepared that they could be for it. I'd like to get that reported back, and I'll submit other questions for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have had a number of opportunities, Secretary Austin, to raise my concerns about the fact that HDRH Hawaii, the missile defense radar for Hawaii, has been zeroed out over the last 2 fiscal year requests. And so in response to some of my concerns raised about the fact that there's no funding requested for this radar, which was told to us that was going to be very important as part of our system to protect Hawaii. And I'm told that under the current situation, currently protected against today's threats, that is a response I've gotten, Secretary Austin. But what we're looking at is we need to protect against future threats, i.e. 2025 threats. So I'm going to want to have further discussions with you and your team as to what the projected dangers are going to 2025. I recognize that Hawaii is protected under today's threat, but not necessarily 2025. And that was the time frame in which this radar was determined to be necessary for our national security. So I don't want to get into a further discussion with you on the explanation as to why it was zeroed out. Let me move on to support for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. The PDI was enacted last year to ensure that DoD prioritizes, invests, and often overlooked but critical components of joint readiness. In fact, with regard to the PDI, the previous commander of INDOPACOM, Admiral Davison, identified 5 areas of focus in the PDI. 1, the joint force lethality. 2, force design and posture. 3, strengthen allies and partners. 4, exercises, experimentation, and implementation. And 5, logistics and security enablers. So looking at your budget requests, though, I do not see requested items in the 5 areas that Admiral Davison had identified as being supportive of the PDI. And in fact, your request identifies platforms like a Navy destroyer, fleet oiler, and items related to the F-35 aircraft as PDI investments. So I'd like to know, why is the vast majority of funding identified to support PDI unrelated to the lines of effort outlined in the INDOPACOM Section 1251 report?
Senator, let me say off the top that our intent was to align our PDI investment with congressional intent. And so my staff is currently working with the committee to clarify and adjust any any perceived misalignments, and in fact make sure that we answer any and all questions. And so we'll continue to work that. As you know, we've dedicated some $5.1 billion to PDI, and again, our intent was to align our investments with congressional intent. I would go further to say that a great deal of the department's budget is invested in capabilities and activities that concentrate on deterring China, and I would further say that I'm committed to working with the committee to making sure that we get it right and answer the needs of the commander out in PACOM.
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate that commitment toward aligning the congressional intent with what the combatant commanders are requesting, and I think that alignment needs to be much better. And for example, the DoD is only partially funding Indo-PACOM's top 3 priorities that are important to deterring China, since you mentioned that just now. Moving on to the importance of military construction, and funding, of course, is very critical to what we need to be doing. And I've had conversations with your team regarding the need for a shipyard modernization and infrastructure support for that, including a new dry dock for Hawaii. Now, I know that there is request for dry docks in Portsmouth, and there's money also for a saltwater purification system in Norfolk. This is in front of a requested funding to move the dry dock for Hawaii along. And so I would request that you take a look at that, and it is very clear that the dry dock in Hawaii is very necessary for the Hawaii Pearl Harbor shipyard to be able to take care of the Virginia-class submarines that are there. We have no capacity to do that right now, and so that dry dock needs to be moved along. So I request that you look at the funding request and to see whether you can move the appropriation request for the dry dock in Hawaii along. My time is up, but I hope that you will continue to discuss that particular concern with us.
I understand, Senator, and
concerns.
we're committed to making sure that we maintain the ability to maintain and sustain our force, and so we'll take a look at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Let me now recognize Senator Kramer and also alert all of my colleagues there will be 2 votes beginning at 11:30, and also I believe the panel sought a break around that time. So talking with the ranking member, we'll figure out a strategy to accomplish all those objectives. Senator Kramer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for your service and for being here. Good to see you. I'm going to start, Secretary Austin, by following up with from an answer that you gave to Senator Shaheen earlier about further support for the Afghan forces, and you specifically mentioned ISR support from the GCC. And I'm wondering if you could tell me specifically what kind of ISR support that is. What system?
Well, certainly we're flying our MQ-9s from there, and it's essentially the vast majority of ISR is being provided from other places outside of Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. We've had to, as we've retrograded, we've had to make sure we protect our key platforms and systems there.
Are Global Hawk Block 30s part of that?
That's correct, yes.
You realize the Block 30s are slated for retirement in this budget, and you and I have had this discussion before. I'm concerned about the lack of a bridge between where we are today and where we're going to get to eventually with new systems, and you have tough choices, and we've heard all about the difficult priorities you have to set. But I remain concerned about the retirement of Block 30s prematurely to benefit our combatant commanders everywhere, but I think Afghanistan presents a rather unique example of the threat. With that, General Milley, could I ask you, are the combatant commanders getting all of the ISR support that they need in every theater?
I would tell you that as Chief of Staff of the Army for 4 years and Chairman for almost 2, No combatant commander has ever gotten all the ISR they want. It is one of those commodities that is in high demand all the time, and no one is completely ever satisfied. Every commander wants perfect knowledge, and that's what ISR does, is feed you with knowledge. We are never going to get enough ISR to fill all the demand. Having said that, it's all a function of risk. It's all a function of where you take risk, what your priority is, are you going to support the main effort, and what do you do for the supporting effort, and so on and so forth. And in this budget, I think that we are adequately funding ISR as we go forward for the main effort relative to China. And with respect to the Block 30s and the MQ-9s, again, it has to do with relevance and pivoting to the future. This budget biases future operating environment, change in the character of war, and against the pacing threat of China. That is not to say we're going to stop everything with respect to A-10s or MQ-9s or some of these systems. But we've got to make that turn.
So, since you were on the topic, if you could list the top 3 threats to America's national security in order, what would they be?
From a military standpoint, a strictly military standpoint, I think China is the #1 military threat as we go forward. But I also acknowledge that Russia is a considerable great power competitor. And those two, in the NDS and in the current strategic environment from a military perspective, there are many, many threats. But from a military perspective, I put those two up there.
I understand. One of the things I want to get at is because I think it was just yesterday, President Biden announced, when he announced America's back in Europe to military men and women, Air Force in the UK, that according to the military leaders, that the #1 threat facing America's national security is climate change. 6 weeks ago today, the European Union Parliament, speaking of NATO and allies, which are a prominent part of your testimony in this budget, EU Parliament passed a resolution 569 to 67, urging the EU institutions and member states to do everything they can to stop the completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. 3 weeks ago today, President Biden lifted the sanctions on completing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And I'm just kind of wondering, and that flies in the face both of America's back, it flies in the face of building NATO alliances, rebuilding, as the budget document states. I'm not sure which ones we lost, but I know that there are at least 8 European Union allies, including Ukraine, who strongly oppose Nord Stream 2 for national security reasons. And certainly from climate change standpoint, if climate change is the #1 threat facing America's national security, allowing Nord Stream 2 to be built is not good for the climate. So I have some great concerns, and I think we ought to get them straightened out. And I don't know for the life of me how completing Nord Stream 2 helps our alliance with the European Union, other than maybe with the current Chancellor of Germany. And,
Senator, if I could just make
please,
a comment on your piece about threats. Climate change is a threat. Climate change has significant impact on military operations, and we have to take it into consideration. Climate change is going to impact natural resources, for example. It's going to impact increased instability in various parts of the world. It's going to impact migrations and so on. And in addition to that, we have infrastructure challenges here at home, witness some of our hurricanes and stuff. So climate change does impact. But the president is looking at it at a much broader angle than I am. I'm looking at it from a strictly military standpoint. And from a strictly military standpoint, I'm putting China and Russia up there. That is not, however, in conflict with the acknowledgement that climate change or infrastructure or education systems, national security has a broad angle to it. I'm looking at it from a strictly military standpoint.
I just think it's peculiar that the president would go to another continent and tell our service members there that the #1 threat is climate change, albeit a threat. With that, my time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Kramer. In collaboration with the ranking member and at the request of the panel to take a short break at this time, I would move to recess for 10 minutes. It also would allow people to go to the vote, which has just been called. And so with that, I would ask for a 10-minute recess. Let me call the hearing back to order after the short recess and recognize Senator Blumenthal for his questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, Chairman Milley, for your extraordinary service, and thank you for being here today. I have been very concerned about the ship that apparently has been sent from Iran to Venezuela. Apparently 2 Iranian vessels are believed to be carrying arms intended to transfer to Venezuela. As you know, these ships are thought to be carrying weapons that would fulfill a deal that Iran and Venezuela made a year ago. We don't know the types of weapons. At least as far as I know, there are reports that Venezuela was considering purchasing missiles from Iran, including long-range ones. Commercial satellite imagery of one of the ships shows fast attack boats loaded on the deck, but it's still unclear whether those boats were aboard when the ships began their journey. I was pleased to see that a senior administration official stated that delivery of these weapons would be a, quote, provocative act and understood as a threat to our partners in the Western Hemisphere, end quote, and that the United States would reserve the right to take appropriate measures, quote, in coordination with our partners to deter the transit or delivery of such weapons. Secretary Austin, allowing this ship to dock seems significant to me on many different levels. It would be the first time that Iranian vessels have made such a transit, and the precedent of allowing Iran to provide weapons to the region causes me grave concern. Do you share that concern? And how would such a delivery affect the region in your view?
Well, Senator, thanks for the question. I am absolutely concerned about the proliferation of weapons, any type of weapons in our neighborhood, and so I share your concern.
Can you tell me whether the administration knows exactly what is on those Iranian vessels?
I would like to take that conversation, either that question to for the record, or we could take that conversation in another forum.
I'd be glad to do it in another forum, in another setting. Have you had any communication with your colleagues in other nations in this hemisphere?
I've not had any discussions with any other nations in our hemisphere on this issue.
Let me ask you, on the topic of white supremacy and violent extremism, which you and I have discussed both in your confirmation hearings and privately, I understand that there will be a task force report. Can you tell us when that report will be released?
I'm sorry, Senator, I didn't quite hear the question.
Can you provide an update as to the status of the extremism task force that you announced recently, and when this committee can expect to be briefed on the results?
As you'll recall, Senator, early on in my tenure, I asked the force to conduct a brief stand down to discuss the issue of extremism in our ranks, and let me preface what I'm going to say by saying that I'm convinced, totally convinced, that 99% of our troops are focused on the right things and doing the right things and embrace the right values each and every day. But as I may have mentioned to you earlier, I believe that small numbers can have an outsized effect regarding this issue. So we did gain some insights from the stand down, and it was a great opportunity for leaders to have discussions with other leaders and leaders to have discussions with subordinates and talk about those behaviors. And we are focused on behaviors, those behaviors that are not supportive of the values that we embrace. In addition to that, we stood up a counter-extremism working group, which routinely monitors our efforts across the department in terms of what we're doing to make sure that we counter extremism or extremist behaviors. They're refining our policies and also gaining a better understanding of the complete challenge. And certainly, I can have the leadership of that working group come to brief you upon request or anytime you want. So,
I would very much appreciate that, Mr. Secretary, and I applaud the efforts that you are making against that probably less than 1%, as you said, 99%, but I think it's an even more overwhelming majority who adhere to the basic values and are dedicated patriots. And the focus on that less than 1% is well warranted because they may have an outsized effect. And so I would welcome an opportunity to learn more from the task force whenever it is appropriate to do so. And I'll be in touch with your office if that's okay.
And I would absolutely agree with you, Senator, that it is less than 1%, and we'll gain better insights and also equip our force with better policies and definitions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that you all are here today. Secretary Austin, I want to come to you on the issue of nuclear deterrence. And when you went through your confirmation hearing, we had a discussion about this. And in your advanced policy questions, you had made a statement, and I'm quoting you, "The tipping point where we must simultaneously overhaul these forces is now here." And that was your comment in reference to nuclear deterrence. And while we're looking at this budget that's before us, we see that modernization is fully funded. But then when you look at deferred maintenance, you see that it cuts hundreds of millions of dollars from the enacted level of the NNSA's deferred maintenance budget. So we know that more than half of the NNSA facilities are over 40 years old, 30% date back to the 40s. So to me, this sounds like we're at a tipping point when we discuss these facilities. So was that deferred maintenance cut coordinated with DOD, and realistically, what effect will it have on the ability of the NNSA to meet the DOD requirements?
To my knowledge, it was not coordinated with DOD. And what I would say to you, though, Senator, is it's very important to me and to our department to make sure that we work with the Department of Energy to ensure that we achieve our common goal of maintaining a robust nuclear deterrent. And you have my commitment to make sure that I remain engaged with DOE to make sure that the right things are happening in this regard.
Okay, then let me ask it like this. What are the consequences that happen if we do not modernize and bring this infrastructure, maintain this infrastructure?
Well, you've heard me say before, Senator, that I'm absolutely committed to the modernization of the Triad, and you know that we've dedicated $28 billion in this 22 budget to that effort. Maintenance is also important, and again, with respect to NNSA, we will remain engaged with DOE to make sure that the right things are happening and gain a better understanding of what DOE's objectives are.
Well, you all frequently will say that infrastructure is a part of what you need to retain talent. And I would expect that the enterprise is invaluable workforce as they are, as we look at 21st century warfare, that it is difficult for them to continue to work in dilapidated and sometimes unsafe conditions. And I would assume that that is a concern to you also.
It absolutely is a concern, both for what the issues that DOD controls, and also, I'm sure it's a concern for all the things that DOE is responsible for as well.
Let's go, and Senator Fisher brought up to you the action of the acting Secretary of the Navy canceling the nuclear sea launch cruise missile. So why was this decision made before completion of the nuclear posture review?
Again, Senator, I've not seen the memo, but I, like the chairman, I will see it very shortly after this hearing. As I understand, the purpose of that memo was to issue some guidance for planning and evaluation to the Navy. But again, I am committed to conducting a nuclear posture review that we talked about earlier, and that will be conducted, and that will drive our activities going forward.
Well, I think that memo sent a message we did not want to send to Russia and China when it comes to great power competition. I did appreciate the department being on pace to fully fund the PDI. And the concern is the number one PDI ask was the Guam Defense System to be fully funded at the $350 million. But when you look through this, the funding totals for the Defense of Guam procurement and the Guam Defense Development line items in the budget was $118.3 million, and that's less than half of the money that is required and for this, which is the number one unfunded priority, if you will. So I'd like to hear you speak to that. We know that these fusion centers are vitally important. I've done a good bit of work on these multilateral fusion centers, and they serve a critical function of really enhancing our intelligence, our information, our logistical coordination. And future fusion centers are the commander's number 11 unfunded priority. These fusion centers also support investments in mission partner environments, the number 2 unfunded priority. So it seems like we've got a pattern that is going here, and I'd love for you to address that. I know I'm over, and there are others waiting for questions, and I would be happy to take that response in writing.
We will most certainly get it to you, Senator. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Let me recognize Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and each of our witnesses here today. Thank you for your service, and thank you for being here today. But I want to start first by saying how disappointed, and I'll just say actually quite angry at a recent decision made by the Air Force to not award Selfridge Air National Guard Base the F-35 International Training Mission. And my feelings are based on the data and the criteria that was presented both by each of the installations that competed as well as what the Air Force put forward. It's clear from my review of that and others that Selfridge was clearly the superior choice in the matter. And this is clearly a problem that we have seen before with the Air Force. As all of you know, the GAO is now investigating strategic basing decisions being made by the Air Force over the last few years. And without question, this committee, this body, needs to retain confidence that the choices made by the U.S. Air Force are based on data and based on criteria and not at a whim or whatever may be behind it. So my question for you, Secretary Austin, is do I have your commitment that you will review the Air Force's F-35 international training mission decision, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about that?
You do have my commitment that I will review it as I do all of those types of decisions over time. And I would also offer to have the Air Force come in and brief you on their decision. The Air Force typically uses a very detailed process to make those kinds of decisions. And I would offer that politics has no place in this decision-making process, this type of decision-making process. And so, if you desired for the Air Force to come and do a laydown for you, I'm sure that they'll be willing to do that.
Well, I appreciate that. I've had some of those discussions already, but to make sure that the process is indeed an objective process, it's critically important there's full transparency so that we can see not only how Selfridge ranked based on that data and the criteria, but also how the one that was selected also ranked, so there could be a true objective comparison of that criteria. We tend to just get one side and not hear the other side. I want to make sure that all of our questions are asked, as that's something I assume you would certainly support.
Thanks, Senator. My guidance and requirement is that we always try to be as transparent as possible. So.
I appreciate that. Now, while I understand the FY22 budget continues to fund PFAS remediation, the reality is that the funding requested is not anywhere close to being sufficient to address the contamination that we continue to find in Michigan and unfortunately hundreds of other sites all across the country. And the price tag to address PFAS contamination comes on top of what is already a staggering backlog of environmental remediation needs facing the department. This is why I've joined my fellow Armed Services Committee members in introducing legislation to expedite cleanup of some of the most contaminated sites, and why I'll continue to work to implement clear and enforceable standards to guide those. So, Secretary Austin, how does the department's budget address the management challenge presented by these literally forever chemicals? And I know this isn't a problem that we're going to be able to solve in a year or quite frankly, even in the next decade. But the longer we wait to address these toxic contaminations, the higher the eventual cost is to our service members, to our communities, and quite frankly, to the U.S. taxpayers.
Yeah, as you know, there's provisions in this budget to address remediation for contaminated sites. I would, and this is, this will extend obviously well beyond this budget, and so you have my commitment to continue to work this going forward. I just recently met with the EPA administrator a couple of weeks ago to focus on this and a couple of other issues. It was a very good meeting. We committed to working together and making sure that we met the standards of remediation and we had good procedures for remediation. This is a significant challenge to our country, as you pointed out. DOD is an element of a larger challenge. Obviously, we're not the only source of this contaminant, but I would tell you that DOD is committed to doing its part to remediating whatever damage has been done in every part of this country where we have contributed to this.
Well, thank you, Secretary Austin. I appreciate your attention to both of the matters that I raised and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for your service. Thank Ms. Secretary, General Milley, you know how much respect I have for both of you. You have a hard job, especially coming here to defend a budget you probably don't like or didn't support internally, but you got to do it now, and that's a tough job. But let me just mention, budgets are a reflection of an administration's priorities. Take a look at this chart. I handed this chart out to you as well, this chart here. the Biden administration, in its $6 trillion budget blowout, clearly prioritizes defense and homeland security dead last. Dead last. If you look at, in terms of inflation adjusted, it's actually a cut. Now, I think a lot of us here, Democrats and Republicans, think national security should be prioritized first, not last. I think you gentlemen probably believe that. But importantly, how can we tell the troops that you're leading that we are prioritizing their mission, which is defending America, when it's clear that the Biden administration's prioritization of their mission is last? A declining defense budget, when almost every other agency in the federal government is getting a massive double-digit increase. Ms. Secretary, you want to try to take that one on first?
Thanks, Senator. What I will tell our troops, and what I have told them and will continue to tell them, is that I truly believe that the President's budget gives us the flexibility to go after the right mix of capabilities to defend the nation and to deter aggression.
No, I mean, I understand that. I've been watching the hearing. I get it. I'm just talking about and again, it's a tough question for you because you're not in charge of these other agencies like OMB and the White House is, but they're clearly not prioritizing the military and national defense relative to any other agency at all. I mean, look at this chart. They are putting the national security mission dead last in terms of the prioritization of budgets. How do we tell our troops that, hey, we're putting you first?
Our troops are always first. They're first now. They will always be first going forward. And again, I do believe that we have what we need to go after the right capabilities. So.
Okay, let me talk. There's been a lot of focus. Senator Kramer talked about this issue of climate change. Clearly, our country needs to address this issue. It's a big issue in Alaska. I'm always puzzled, though, how our military is task organized to do this. You know, I had the honor of serving with you at CENTCOM. General Milley, we overlapped briefly in Afghanistan. I don't think in any of my military service I heard climate change as a phrase mentioned once. I heard the Taliban, Iraq, Iran, IEDs. Nevertheless, Ms. Secretary, in your opening statement, you mentioned climate change 15 times and lethality twice, which I think is a bit of a mismatch. I was just in South Korea and Taiwan. You guys also mentioned China as our pacing threat. Let me ask a simple question that relates to these two priorities. What is a more immediate threat to our national security interests that DoD has the capability of responding to, particularly in the Asia-Pacific, a Chinese communist invasion of Taiwan or the challenge of climate change? I think it's a pretty simple question. I think it's actually a really simple answer. Mr. Secretary, do you have a thought on that?
First, I don't recall mentioning climate change 15 times. I'll go back and do my word count.
I think it was in your written statement.
Okay. And let me also be clear, Senator, that lethality is important. This is the most lethal force that's ever occupied the planet, and it will remain so going forward. And that's what we remain focused on in the Department of Defense, defending this nation, and we'll go after the capabilities required to do that.
So Taiwan invasion of China by the Chinese Communist Party or climate change? I think it's very simple. What's the most immediate threat DoD can respond to?
The most significant military threat that we're focused on, and you've heard me say this probably 100 times, Senator, is China. It's our pacing challenge, and that's what we've asked you a number of times to help us resource our efforts on that challenge, and I appreciate what you've done thus far, and I know that you'll continue to help us going forward.
Let me ask one final question. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, it's related to that. I have another chart here. It shows that our budget increases or decreases relative to the Chinese. The Chinese have dramatically and consistently increased their defense budget annually by at least 6%, sometimes as much as 13%. We've increased ours during the Trump administration when the Republicans controlled the Senate. You see during the Biden administration, Obama-Biden, it was dramatically cut. Now we're looking at cuts again. What message does this chart send to China and our allies in the region, and can we sustain our declining comparative advantage over China militarily if these trends continue? And that's both for the Secretary and General Milley.
Well, the message that I'm concerned about is the message that we send to the world, and that is that we're going to continue to go after the capabilities and develop the operational concepts to be able to deter anyone who would venture to take on the United States of America. So we will have the capabilities necessary to defend this nation.
General.
So, Senator, a couple of things. I want to go back, make 2 points on the budget piece, explaining it to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Guardians out there. We're getting $715 billion if this is passed. That's a lot of money. That's 50% of the entire president's budget. That's 1 out of every $2 in the discretionary spending of the federal government. That is not a small amount of change. The increases that you show on your chart, those are factually correct, but relative to the whole and in context, we're getting a lot of money. So that's the first thing. Second thing is relative to climate change. Paragraph 1 of every operations order I've ever seen for 41 consecutive years says enemy situation to include weather and terrain. We always consider weather, and climate change is weather at the strategic level. It has military impact. We're not going to change climate change. The Department of Defense is not going to change climate change, but we must consider it in our strategic calculations all the time because it's going to increase instability overseas. It has impact in our infrastructure here. So climate change is real. The military threat is China, as the Secretary just said, is the pacing threat. We are calculating all of our calculations relative to that as a pacing threat, and others are second in nature. And the third piece, relative to the China versus U.S. spending. This is a disturbing trend. There's no question about it with respect to China. They have made a major economic investment in developing their military. It's been going on for 20 or 30 years. The gaps that used to exist, say 20, 30 years ago, were like this. Today they're like that. And the Chinese have a deliberate plan to be a global challenger to the United States of America militarily by mid-century. We have got to continue strong investments in our military, and I think this budget for this year is an adequate investment right now. We have to set the conditions, though, to pivot to the future character of war with the pacing threat of China.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Let me now recognize via WebEx Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for your service to our country. While responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, natural disasters and civil unrest, or seamlessly integrating with the joint force and overseas operations, the National Guard and Reserve component continues to answer the call. Over the past 20 years, the high demand for reserve component forces has necessitated a shift from a strategic reserve to an operational force. In fact, last June, over 120,000 National Guard troops were mobilized, more than at any time since World War II. In short, our nation relies on our reserve component forces, the reserves and the National Guard, to defend the United States and fulfill the DoD's national security responsibilities. However, even though the National Guard and Reserves are serving in critical capacities and in dangerous duty assignments, they are not receiving the same pay and benefits as their active duty counterparts. The complexity of the current slate of duty statuses adds unnecessary confusion to activating reserve component forces. The disparity in pay and benefits between different duty statuses can also incentivize manipulating orders to minimize the service members' access to benefits. I believe duty status reform is necessary to ensure the National Guard and Reserve forces receive equal pay and access to the health care and educational benefits they deserve for the work that they do. Bottom line, service members doing the same job in the same place should not earn different pay and benefits based on their duty statuses. General Milley, could you please update me on the DoD's plans to address reserve component duty status reform? And when do you anticipate releasing your findings?
Thanks, Senator. As part of the joint force, active duty Reserve, and National Guard. It's a total force. And we have a commitment to ensure that we have appropriate and fair pay and benefits given to our National Guard soldiers and our troops and our reservists. That reform effort is underway. We're reviewing that. I can't give you the exact date of when we'll have that to you, but we are working it, and we're working it very hard, and we're working it with both the National Guard Bureau and each of the services. But we do recognize the need to ensure that it's evenly applied in terms of pay and benefits to the soldiers in the reserve component, or the troops in the reserve component.
Well, will you also commit to making sure that whatever the reform proposal is, that it is appropriately shaped to eliminate orders manipulation and current pay and benefit disparities?
Sure, absolutely. You know, our commitment is to ensure that everyone who wears the cloth of our nation, whether they're active, guard, or reserve, and no matter where they are treated equally in all respects, to include pay and benefits. And I commit to that to you, and I'll get you the answer on the exact date of when the reform proposals are due in.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, reserve component service members are required to maintain the same proficiency in certain critical skill sets as the active component counterparts, even though they don't necessarily put on the uniform every day. This is especially true for pilots, for example. Yet they only receive the incentive pay at a fraction of the amount of active service members. I believe every service member, whether active or on reserves duty, deserves to be fairly compensated for maintaining mission essential skills. And the RAND Corporation has shown that incentive pay can help improve retention and is far more cost effective than training new service members to replace those who separate. As we continue to strengthen our National Guard and Reserve forces, we must retain our talented service members. That's why I introduced the bipartisan National Guard and Reserve Incentive Pay Parity Act to help ensure that reserve component service members in high skill roles are compensated at the same rates as their active duty counterparts. Secretary Austin, will you commit to exploring options such as the Incentive Pay Parity Act to help improve retention, especially of those service members with critical skills?
I will, Senator, and for all the reasons that General Milley mentioned, our Guard and Reserve have done amazing work. The skill sets that you're talking about in many cases are warfighting or combat-related skills, and so it's absolutely important that they are proficient, and they should receive the same proficiency pay.
Thank you. And I have one final question I will submit for the record, but it has to do with modernization efforts to continue across the joint force, and wanting to know whether DoD and the military services are factoring in program performance into decisions about how to prioritize budget requests to adequately resource successful programs such as future vertical lift. But I will submit that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Let me recognize Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. First off, I want to thank each of you for your willingness to serve. You have very significant roles for our country. Probably the most important thing we can be doing is making sure we defend our freedoms. Would any of you disagree that we're dealing with, when you're thinking about Communist China, you're thinking about a party that either wants world domination or, at the worst case, wants to absolutely control the Indo-Pacific?
I do believe that their goal is to control the Indo-Pacific, and I also believe that they desire to be the dominant or preeminent country in the world, and so I think they're working towards that end.
So would y'all disagree that their goal is to eventually take back Taiwan, a great American ally? Anybody wouldn't disagree with that, right?
I would not disagree with the point that they have a goal of eventually uniting Taiwan with China. Yeah. And
that would be whether they do it through voluntarily or involuntarily through the military. Do y'all believe that we're going to continue to see more surveillance by the Communist Party of China of American citizens and our allies around the world? And we're seeing more surveillance all the time. You agree with that, right?
It stands to reason that whatever level of surveillance that's ongoing now will continue and quite possibly increase going forward.
So if you look at this, you saw what Senator Sullivan brought up. You saw the fact that, year after year, they're investing more in their military. Their goal is to have an economy bigger than ours. And you seem to agree that if they have an economy bigger than ours, they're going to increase their defense spending. And as General Milley says, it's getting closer and closer. So, and if China's able to pull all this off, then our opportunities all over the world, opportunities of American citizens and our way of life is going to change, right? If they can fulfill their goals, then our opportunities will be diminished. Would you all agree with that?
Yeah, I would describe our relationship with China currently as one of competition. I think, again, you've mentioned that they desire to be the preeminent country on the planet, and that is, in fact, the case. Their mid to long-term goal is to do that. They look to compete with us not only militarily, but across the spectrum of activity. And what you see us doing, the military and other sectors in our government, is making sure that we remain competitive, economically, making sure that we're developing the best. We continue to develop the best scientists in the world, and we do the most comprehensive research. So it is a competition across a broad spectrum of activity.
So if you follow through the reasoning, if China wants to be, either Indo-Pacific or world dominant, if they build an economy bigger than ours, if they continue to outinvest us in the military, which they are, or at least growing faster than we are, then what are y'all doing to, one, inform American citizens of the risk? Because, we all do a budget based on what the American citizens' beliefs a priority is. That's how we elect our elected leaders. So what are y'all doing to, one, inform the public of the risk of communist China and ensuring that we have the budget we need to make sure that in 5 or 10 or 15 years we're not sitting here, we're saying we wish we would have done more. We all saw this threat, but we didn't do enough about it.
Yeah, just about every time you hear me speak, Senator, I know you probably grow tired of me talking about the competition with China, but that is my focus. My number one focus is to defend this nation and protect our interests. Our pacing challenge is and will continue to be China. And again, we're going after the capabilities that can match the operational concepts that we're putting into play and allow us to be not only competitive but actually dominant in this competition. So that's what the Department of Defense is doing, and I think you see activity across the entire government that's focused on making sure that we not only can compete with China, but maintain our edge with respect to China.
Do you think it's important that in your role that you inform the American public of the risk of communist China so everybody will be more focused on making sure we have the military budget we need?
We do so routinely, and we will continue to do that, Senator Scott. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Scott. Let me recognize Senator Rosen, please.
There it is. Thank you, Chairman Reed. Ranking Member Inhofe, for holding this hearing. I'd like to thank the witnesses for your service to our great nation. Thank you for being here today. Right before the break, Senator Kramer was talking to you about our ISR requirements and his concerns, and I am concerned as well about the MQ-9. So, Secretary Austin, the MQ-9 Reaper, I don't have to tell you, it's critical to supporting our current intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance requirements. A key part of the MQ-9 architecture is the mission at Nevada's Creech Air Force Base. Last year, CENTCOM Commander General McKenzie included additional MQ-9 funding at the top of his unfunded priorities, and in April he told this committee of the MQ-9's importance and his need for more of them, not fewer. The Air Force today still lacks the ISR capacity to meet combatant commanders' requirements contained in the 2018 National Defense Strategy. Despite this, the department has previously proposed cutting this platform, their most cost-effective, without a program of record to replace it, which would further risk widening the ISR capability gap that General Milley talked about. So, Secretary Austin, what is the department's plan for the MQ-9? And given its importance, cost-effectiveness, and the requirement for combatant commanders for more ISR assets, why has the Air Force cut funding for this program without a program of record to replace it?
Well, thank you, Senator. I think you heard General Milley talk earlier about the way combatant commanders view ISR, having been a combatant commander in a former life. I can tell you I agree with him. There is never enough ISR. I will always want more. The Air Force has committed to taking off a number of lines of ISR, but they're not reducing the tails, the aircraft that go with those lines. What they're doing is making sure that they upgrade and modernize their aircraft where possible, and so that they can network the aircraft better. So the number of tails is not being reduced. The number of lines is being reduced slightly.
And so can you get to us some information about that so we know what the program of record will be going forward and how it can impact us?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'd like to move on to talking about a little bit about Iranian aggression, how we combat that, because Iranian-backed militias, of course, are increasingly targeting U.S. installations, our service members in Iraq via rocket and drone attacks. Iran continues to be the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, a threat to the U.S., allied interests all across the world via its ballistic missile program, its support for terrorist proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, KHAAH, and many others. And so according to a recently released annual threat assessment of the U.S. Intelligence Committee, and I quote, Iran-supported Iraqi Shia militias will continue to pose the primary threat to U.S. personnel in Iraq. So to Secretary Austin and General Milley, with the constant threat to the U.S. and coalition forces in the Mideast posed by Iran and Iran-backed militia groups, what are we doing to counter them, and how are we proactively protecting our forces and personnel? Do we have what we need to do that and prevent these militias and terrorists from targeting our U.S. troops in the region?
Yeah, we certainly continue to demand that Iran cease its malicious behavior in the region in terms of its support of the Iranian-backed Shia militia groups, and we demand that they cease providing them, modernized equipment so that they can conduct these kinds of attacks. We're doing everything within our power, within our capability to make sure that our troops that are forward deployed have adequate protection. We're engaging the Iraqi leadership to make sure that the Iraqi leadership does what's necessary to help protect our citizens who are there to help the Iraqi government.
So I would say, in addition to everything the Secretary said, is think offense, defense. So in terms of defense, the force protection of the force, the disposition of exactly where they're at, how many they're at, what's the hardening of those sites, we're doing all of those measures. In addition to that, we have not missile defense, but air defense capabilities, CRAMs, counter-rocket and mortar, and counter-UAS systems that were put in place. Those have been proven quite effective, actually, against some of the Shia militia group capabilities. We're going to continue to reinforce all of that. On the offense side, I won't discuss it here, but I can discuss it in some detail in a classified session as to what we can do, what we're prepared to do, and what we have already done. All of that in combination, we think, is mitigating the risk. It certainly doesn't reduce it to zero. It's a dangerous environment. We all recognize that. But we've got to continue to work by, with, and through the Iraqi government because they're the first line of defense for the protection of our forces in their country.
Well, thank you. I just want to be sure that we have assets on the ground to defend American installations in Iraq and Syria and other places in the Middle East.
Absolutely do.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Thank you for your service, as always. Mr. Secretary, if I could just start with you. I asked you earlier this year if you agreed with the National Defense Strategy assessment that the U.S. military needs to be postured, and here's the quote, to deter and prevent a fait accompli by an agile, opportunistic adversary. You responded to me in writing, which I appreciated, and I appreciated the response you gave, which was, you said, and I'm quoting you now, yes, I agree with the Commission's finding. A combat credible, forward deterrent posture is instrumental to our ability to deter and, if necessary, deny a fait accompli scenario. I assume you still agree with that.
I do, Senator.
Very good. And would you also agree then, I assume that this would apply to our ability to maintain maintain the ability to defeat a Chinese fait accompli against Taiwan. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, Senator. I think nobody wants to see a unilateral change of the status quo with respect to Taiwan. You've heard us say that we are committed to helping Taiwan defend itself in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 communiques and the 6 assurances. And so our position hasn't changed in that regard, and we'll continue to help them develop the capability to.
General Milley, if I could just get you on this as well, would you agree that the U.S. should maintain its ability to defeat a Chinese fait accompli against Taiwan if necessary?
I absolutely would, but Senator, frankly, I'm not sure what a Chinese fait accompli in Taiwan is. If you're talking about a military invasion of Taiwan, crossing the straits, the Taiwan Straits, with a sizable military force to seize an island the size of Taiwan against the military that they have, with the population that they have, that's an extraordinarily complex and difficult operation, even if against an unopposed force. That's a very hard thing to do. But I can assure you that we have the capabilities if there were political decisions made in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act and so on. But we do have military capabilities.
To defeat such an attempted invasion is what you're saying, General Milley. Got it. Good. Would you agree, Mr. Secretary, if I could just come back to you, would you agree that we need to be, when we think about deterring China, that we need to be as focused on deterring China in the next 3 to 5, 7 years as we are 10 to 15 years from now? And I'm asking this, the context for this is we've heard now from the outgoing PACOM commander, from the incoming PACOM commander. We just heard earlier this week from the former Deputy National Security Advisor that China is increasingly aggressive and that the window to deter that aggression may be shorter than we had thought. So thus my question, would you agree that we need to be focused on deterring them in the short to medium term, 3, 5, 7 years, including the longer term?
We do, and I would say that those 2 issues are not mutually exclusive, Senator. As you know, they complement each other. While we're developing a future capability, we certainly have to bridge to that capability, and that is absolutely our focus.
Great.
And Senator, I would say that's what the key here is: deterrence. We are in a condition of strategic great power competition. It needs to stay at competition. And deterrence is key to prevent it from going from competition to incident or competition to war.
Yeah, very good. I'm glad you mentioned that. And if I could just follow up on that, General, the adversary, a competitor, in this case China, knowing that we have the ability to deter them, we have the ability to do what you said a minute ago, which is if they should choose military aggression, we have the ability, should we choose to deny that aggression, that is important for deterrence, is it not? Them knowing we have the ability.
In simple terms, deterrence is actually a very complex thing, but in simple terms, you have to have the capability. Your opponent has to know you have the capability. You've got to communicate that capability to your opponent. He has to know it. You have to communicate your will to use it if necessary, and both actors have to be rational. If all of those components are there, in simple terms, you'll be able to achieve a state of deterrence. Thus far, it's achieved.
Very good. Thank you for that. Mr. Secretary, let me just ask you in this context then about the Department's request for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. In your request, you include, if I understand it correctly, $23 million for force design and posture improvements out of the $2.2 billion that's required. I'm trying to understand how providing our forces in the Pacific with just 1% of the funding they need for posture improvements to support those combat credible forward deterrent posture that we're talking about, how can we do that and say that we're going to maintain the ability to deter or deny a fait accompli?
Yeah, so Senator, I would flag for you just a couple of issues. The first issue is that, as I said earlier, that our intent is to make sure that we, with respect to the PDI investment, that we meet the congressional intent. And we believe that we have invested in a number of things that meets that intent, and we've offered, and we will come to meet with your staff and explain where the investments are to make sure that the language isn't confusing. The second thing is we've invested $5.1 billion in the PDI. The third thing I would flag for you is that much of what we're investing in terms of capability is really focused on our efforts to counter the challenge presented by China. And I would also say that when we speak of deterrence, we're not talking about just air, land, and sea. We're talking about using every capability across all domains to include cyber and space. We're talking about integrating the capabilities of our allies, which I believe is very, very important. And we're talking about using every lever that the United States government has available to it to, in fact, affect that deterrence.
Thank you very much. I've got some more questions for you on this, Mr. Secretary. I'll follow up with you in writing, but I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you on it. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Tuberville, please. Put your microphone on, please.
Hello. That work? Good. Thank you. I thought mine was worn out after this long day, Mr. Secretary. I want to take a little different angle here. I've been a team builder all my life, and I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I've been talking my first 6 months here with recruiters out in the field for the military. I'm a huge military person, military brat, grew up in a military family. We talk about missiles and bombs and ships, and you got to have all those. But if we don't have the people, the best people we can possibly get, we're going to be in trouble. It's like winning a football game. Best players win games. There's no doubt, same thing with the military. And we've always had a strong military. I hear in a lot of comments about why should I get in the military? They didn't look out for the people in Iraq and Afghanistan on the burn pits. Gentlemen, we got a huge problem. We're getting ready to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars for veterans that have gone over and breathed that smoke and chemicals and all those things. We got to make better decisions than that. All that money we're going to get ready to spend, it could have gone to you guys, to defense. But to me, it's going to be hard to recruit good people, the best people. And I hear all this extremism stuff. And again, I've dealt with people all my life. You don't have to like each other to be on the team. I mean, a lot of my players could not stand other guys on the team. They just had personality conflicts. But at the end of the day, you got to earn respect. You got to earn the trust and dedication and all that from your teammates. I mean, you got to learn that. And so I just hate for us to get off on this tangent of the people that we have in the military. Now, in football, for instance, it's your coaches that has, when you bring players in, you got to build a team. You got to bring them together. Same thing in the military. You got lieutenants, captains, drill sergeants, corporals, all those. Everybody's responsibility is to bring that team together. And the things that I'm hearing and seeing in the military bases I've been going to the last 6 months and talking to recruiters, we're going to have a tough time. And then we got to face the people in big tech of taking the best and brightest, because cyber is one of the things that we really got to get into in the military and continue to grow in the bill and all of our technology. That being said, I just want to make sure that we understand, that we talk about all this equipment and the budget and all that. And I understand we've got to have that, but if we don't have the people, it doesn't make any difference. We had this selective service here a few months ago. They sat right here and they told us that if we had a draft today, we'd have 35 million people that we could draft from, 35 million. Only 450,000 of those 35 million are eligible to be in the military for one form. That's not enough. That is not enough. We can't build a killing machine, which is what our military is. You can say anything else. we got to be able to kill the enemy when they come at us. And so that's just something that I've watched and listened to. I've been on the road talking, and I want us to have the best military in the world, and we probably do. I want us to fund the best military, but we've got to fund our young men and women that are going to get in the military, and they got to want to come in. They've got to want to be there. They got to want to be there for the simple fact that they want to fight for the best country on the face of the earth. Just one question I got for you, Secretary Austin. Yes, no, I wrote you a letter. Me and Senator Wicker and Kramer, and our concern was disturbing about training materials coming from our military. And let me be clear. Like you, we want to see good order and discipline in the ranks for our military to remain the nonpartisan institution that Americans trust more than any other. But what emerged from some of the services revealed is disappointing partisan slant and a poorly defined First Amendment rights for military members. This year, we've seen multiple senior military leaders in uniform from official DOD channels criticize individual members of the press. That ain't got nothing to do with the military. To me, you just got to go about your business. We've seen the National Guard march on elected officials here just down from this building. We asked you to provide a report on what steps your office will take to reprimand officers who inappropriately engage in partisan behavior to ensure that the stand-down training materials comply with the guidance issued by your office. We asked for that report no later than May the 7th, and we still hadn't gotten that. And I know you've been busy, but we just like to know, the steps that we're going to take to clamp down on people that don't deserve to be in our military. And I didn't want to get up here and rant, but I've been a recruiter all my life, and we've got to be able to recruit, people to spend this money that we're going to appropriate you in the right way, because we're in dire straits. And Secretary Austin, could I get that commitment?
You certainly have that commitment, and I'd also like to offer a thought on what you just said, Senator, and thanks for your continued support of our great military. And again, you've heard me say this a couple of times today, and I don't want our force or anybody else in this country to be confused. It is the most lethal organization on the face of the planet, and it will remain so, and it will remain the most cohesive organization on the face of the planet. When I came in as a Secretary of Defense, I issued guidance to the force, and that guidance included three things. My focus is on defending this nation and protecting our interests. The second thing is taking care of our people, and the third thing is teamwork. And like you, I put a couple of teams together too. And I've employed those teams in the combat, and I've watched these youngsters do amazing things in support of their country and in support of each other. It's unbelievable. And so, I have a pretty good feel in terms of what it takes to create that kind of cohesion, and cohesion is what is most important to me, just like it is to you, Senator. I know you absolutely understand that, and you've demonstrated that you understand that with some tremendous success over the years. Regarding the burn pits, the welfare of our veterans is foremost in my mind. I mean, that's something that me and the chairman both really care about. And I would tell you that the Secretary of the VA, Secretary McDonough, shares that concern. And he and I work together closely on a number of issues, and we have vowed to make sure that we don't lose our veterans as a transition from active duty to retirement or get out of the military and go do something else. I've inhaled those fumes from burn pits. The chairman has inhaled those fumes from burn pits. We know it's important to take care of our troops, and you have our commitment to remain focused on that. But I would also say that this is not just the Army's problem. It's not just the military's problem. This is the issue for the United States of America. These are our troops, and we're going to do everything we can to take care of them. And I know that all the great resourcers and authorizers that are in this room share that same commitment, and we felt that commitment going forward. And I know that it's the reason that you asked that question. But the question you have is, are we committed to it? And Senator, I am absolutely committed to making sure that we do what we can to ensure that this issue is addressed. And I know that Secretary McDonough is working this issue very hard as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Tuberville. This is the second round. I will recognize Senator King, who will ask one question, and he will also preside and conclude the hearing, and then he will recognize Senator Sullivan for one question. I'd ask both the questions and the responses be as concise and eloquent as they've been all morning. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, just a very brief observation. There's been a lot of talk about budgets and comparisons of budgets and budgets with China. I yield to no one in terms of my determination to successfully compete with China on all fronts. I would point out, though, even though they have had significant increases lately, their budget this year is still less than 1/3 of ours. I think that's important just to have that context, because we've been talking about growth, but they were showing significant growth from a much lower base. General Milley, I am gravely concerned about the men and women in Afghanistan who supported and aided our troops, and that we're not moving fast enough to be sure that they are brought to safety. I think this is an essential moral commitment of this country, and also a practical one. If we leave these people to the tender mercies of the Taliban, I don't know who is ever going to cooperate and help us again in another setting. So I hope that both the Pentagon, the White House, and all the agencies of the U.S. government are committed to this as an urgent priority, and that if we can't repatriate all of these people to this country, that we at least make arrangements to get them safely out of Afghanistan. Can you give me your thoughts on that, please?
Well, Senator, first, I think the President, SecDef, the Secretary of State, myself, others have all commented on the importance of making sure that we keep faith with those that have supported us over the last 2 decades in Afghanistan, and that clearly is our intent, and we will do that. In terms of specific actions, Department of State has the lead on the special immigrant visa program and some other programs with respect to those Afghans that have supported us. That planning is working through the system right now, but I can commit to you that it's my belief that the United States government will do what is necessary in order to ensure the safety and protection of those that have been working with us for 2 decades.
Thank you. The term "working through the system" is what gives me some concern. This is an absolutely urgent priority over the next 6 to 8 weeks, I would say, as our troops draw down. So I appreciate your commitment on that. Mr. Secretary, I assume you make absolutely the same commitment.
You're correct, Senator. This is very important to us, and we're pushing as hard as we can on our end to move as fast as we can. I know Secretary Blinken has asked for an increase in authorizations in terms of numbers to move into the SIV process, and I would ask your support in providing that authorization. And again, anything that you can do to expand our current capabilities in terms of authorizations would be very, very much appreciated.
I'm sure the members of this committee will work to that end and look forward to working with you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I share your views, and I know most of the members of the committee do, on keeping faith with those who support us in Afghanistan. And gentlemen, I appreciate you running the gauntlet today. It's an important element of our constitutional oversight responsibilities. I have one final question. A growing and critical area of great power competition with Russia, certainly, but also with China, is our strategic interest in the Arctic. And, Mr. Secretary, as you know, in general, each of the military services, in some ways prompted by this committee, have now published an Arctic strategy. I think all of us view this as a positive development. And both of you, during your confirmation hearings, had committed to focus on this area of our national security, to fully resource each of the service Arctic strategies. Deputy Secretary Hicks through her confirmation process, did the same. In a Strategic Forces Subcommittee hearing yesterday, I had the chance to ask General Van Herk, who's the NORTHCOM commander, in his role as the designated advocate for Arctic capabilities, how he saw each of the services implementing their respective strategies in the President's new budget submission. And he told me that DoD resourcing for the various service Arctic strategies was, quote, inching along, but that DoD, quote, didn't move the ball very far down the field with the FY22 budget. So I want to ask both of you, do you share this view, and how can we work to fully resource the service strategies that have been put out, the DoD strategies that have been put out in this important area of great power competition?
Thank you, Senator. You know, when we talked before, you know, I indicated to you that the Arctic and Arctic strategy was important to me, and that hasn't changed. It remains so. As you know, we're working on developing our national defense strategy overall, and also working through to refine our force posture globally. As we develop that national defense strategy, certainly the Arctic will be an area that we will take into consideration and make sure that we have the right emphasis, the right focus, and that strategy will drive our resourcing.
Great. Thank you. General Milley, do you have a view?
Yeah, absolutely. We're committed to the Arctic strategy. And, you know, this whole issue with the Arctic is a classic example of the strategic military impact of climate change. As the snow caps melt and the ice packs melt, it's exposing further resources. The Russians and Chinese are realizing that. So they are clearly trying to exploit some of that. And we are going to see increased, not decreased, great power competition in the Arctic over time. And we do need to fully resource the Arctic strategy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to associate myself with Senator Sullivan's questions on the Arctic. It's an incredibly important strategic area. I appreciate your commitments. With no further questions, and I understand the decision has been made not to go to an additional closed session, so I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today, for your forthrightness, for the information that you've shared, and most of all for your service to our country. With that, this hearing is adjourned.